All right. Thank you everyone for your patience this morning. I think we're ready to get started. My name is Kevin Bright. I'm the Sustainability and Housing Director for the Destination Medical Center. We wanted to extend our thanks for everybody for showing up today for this very important topic. And to kick us off today, I'm very excited to introduce Mayor Norton, Mayor of Rochester, many of you know. So warm round of applause for the mayor, please. Thanks.
Good morning. I'll lower this a little bit. Really excited to see a great crowd here. This is a very important topic for our community and actually for many communities today. We do have a few elected officials in the room. I'm not going to call out names because I don't want to. The only one that I saw that had arrived already stepped into the hall. But I do know, I think there are 6 different county commissioners and city council members that will be dropping in during the day that have other meetings this morning. But this is very important to both city and county elected officials. So as mayor and vice chair for the Destination Medical Center board, I'm excited to welcome all of you to Rochester. I know many of you are from this area, and thank you so much for wanting to learn more about our community, its housing needs, and the collaborations that we are using to solve some of the really dire problems. Oh, Mark Tyne, you're here. Would you, right, Mark Tyne, County Commissioner, is here. I want to recognize him. Thank you, Mark. He's chair of the County Commission. To meaningfully address our housing supply issues, our solutions must also be innovative and based on our community's needs. This is why I'm so excited for the summit today, to help others understand our challenge, but also of our opportunities, our collective financial tools, which are very interesting, and to highlight some innovative approaches that would suit our community and perhaps yours if you're not from Rochester as well. Finally, I'm excited to hear from our panelists this afternoon, and I too will be stepping in and out, but very excited to hear these presentations about the innovative practices being used and the path that it will take to realize a development for first-time developers and developers of color. And that presentation is this afternoon. Some of you in the audience may be aware that the City of Rochester was selected as one of 15 Global Mayor's Challenge winners from across the entire world. We're just thrilled to have been selected, one of 3 in the United States. The focus of the project is to create sustainable career pathways for BIPOC women to enter the design and construction industries. Through this work, we deeply understand the challenges of BIPOC women to enter this industry, as well as the challenges that employers and educators have to diversify the workforce and their student body populations. 2 of the takeaways from this effort is the importance of mentorship and networking. My hope today, especially upon understanding the challenges of BIPOC developers, is that you will explore opportunities to introduce yourself to the community and its diverse members. I'd like to thank one last time all of you for being here, for your interest in our community, and hopeful assistance in solving the housing challenges of our time. It will require all of us thinking creatively, working collaboratively to make meaningful progress in this area, and I want to thank you in advance for the efforts that I know you will all make. So have a great conference, and I'll be in and out, but look forward to the presentations as well. Kevin?
Thanks, Mayor Norton. Next speaker, we have Patrick Sieb, the Executive Director of the Destination Medical Center, to kick off the day for us and kind of get us going. So warm round of applause for Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. When I woke up this morning, I was in Pittsburgh. It sounds like the beginning of a stupid joke, but I actually was in Pittsburgh when I woke up this morning, having attended a international conference that was held in Pittsburgh, attended by people from the United States, people from Canada, people from the UK, where they wanted to hear the story of Destination Medical Center. And this audience was keenly interested in not only this idea of how do you take advantage of an anchor institution like Mayo Clinic and organize your economy and your economic development strategy around the assets of that resource, but what they were really interested in is the methodology. How are we going about that? And they were so impressed to learn about not only do we have a clear plan here in Rochester, not only do we have the partnerships, and we're going to talk a lot about the partnerships, and that we have the resources. Thinking about the storm that hit Minnesota last night, and remembering a pastor from a church after a storm like that, and he said to his congregation, the bad news is we lost the roof on our church, and the good news is we have the money for it. Well, the other bad news is the money's in your pockets. And I think the solution to housing in Rochester is in this room and in this community. And as every community is challenged by this terrible shortage of housing. In fact, one of the people at this conference yesterday, a leading economic development organization, said it used to be that when companies were looking for communities, they wanted to find cheap land, or they wanted to find cheap electricity, or they wanted to find water, or they wanted to find quality of life. Now the first question they ask is there housing that's affordable for the workforce I want to grow in that community? And it wasn't affordable housing, it was housing that's affordable across all sectors. And so I think when we think about the monumental task we have in Rochester, as does every community, is how do we create that infrastructure, that core infrastructure called housing, that will allow our community to prosper and thrive. And so I'm so pleased to join all of you to watch the work that's been going on with the county and with the city and with the Housing Coalition and with a Destination Medical Center, and so many of you in this room to solve the questions and to find answers and to be creative. And I think when we leave here today, leaving here with a sense of optimism, a sense of new relationships, understanding of tools and resources that maybe we didn't know existed, or that could be parlayed into something bigger than individual projects. So that's how I come into this session, how I come into this meeting. I just want to thank all of you, and especially Kevin and the team organizing this to bring this group together. I look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Patrick. With that, we're ready for our first presentation and panel discussion for today. So with that, I'd like to welcome up David Dunn, Housing Director for Olmsted County Housing Redevelopment Authority, and Taryn Edens, the Manager of Housing and Neighborhood Services from the City of Rochester. Welcome to the stage. Thank you for being here.
Morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here, and thank you for all your efforts and work that you do to further housing in our community. Today, I'm going to be presenting to you some results of a study that we completed in 2020 in partnership with my colleague from the county, Dave. My name is Taryn, and I'm with the City of Rochester. So we're going to start off just giving you some housing background. A lot of folks use common terminology, so to just level set with everyone, we're going to start there to kind of explain what we mean when we're talking about affordable housing or different categories of housing. Technically speaking, affordable housing just means housing that is affordable to households and that they're paying no more than 30% of their gross income towards housing. This does include utilities. So anything over that amount for a household income is technically not affordable to households. The two categories of housing we're going to be discussing largely today are often called workforce housing and market rate housing. So when we're talking about workforce housing, we mean housing that is affordable to households earning around 50% of the area median income and above. Often this sort of housing is awarded tax credits or tax incentives to encourage or require lower rents. So it often is subsidized and has capped rates at the rents in order to provide that affordability to households. The other type of housing we'll discuss is market rate housing. This is intended to serve households earning 100% of our area median income, which is, we'll take a look at what the area median income is in a moment here. And up, there are no rent restrictions, there are no subsidies needed. So those are kind of the two categories of housing that we're going to discuss today. So what is area median income? A lot of you are probably familiar with this. We often call it AMI, but essentially a calculation is done for our region. Rochester is a metropolitan area, so this calculation includes Rochester, Olmsted, and our surrounding counties. The numbers that you're seeing up here are from 2021. They've gone up about 10% very recently. essentially what you'll see is different percentages of the area median income, right? So the AMI for a household of, we'll say 4, is around $103,000, 10% above, it's about 10% more than that now. And so that means half of our households in our community earn less than that, and 50% earn above that. So it's not exactly a perfect bell curve. So something to keep in mind here. So generally, when we're producing housing, we've got different terminology that you'll see below. It's intended to serve folks at different household incomes, both supportive housing, public housing, workforce rental housing that we're going to talk about a lot. And generally, we see home ownership affordable to those earning around 60% of the area median income and above. So just to level set around AMI and some of the discussions we're going to be having today. So a lot of what Dave and I will present to you is around a Maxfield housing study. So it was a housing needs assessment that was completed in 2013 and again in 2020. It's a very large document. So we're going to give you the high level overview of what we gathered from that document and what we've identified as our top 5 housing gaps for our community. I would say that it's interesting that we did it in 2020. We're able to get a little bit of perspective of the impacts of the pandemic. So we'll speak to that a little bit. The study does include targets for the next decade, and that's what we're going to be discussing with you all today. So just a graph here for you to kind of digest that came out of the Maxfield study. It's essentially showing the impacts of our for sale housing not meeting the demand, and it shows both the demand and units delivered in 2013 and 2016. And what's interesting about this graph is you can see that they completely flopped, right? The demand and the units delivered completely switched. We'll talk a lot about what our housing unit need is. We have an idea of how many units we need to meet the demand by 2030. We'll use different categories for you to take a look at. So you'll see we know there's a demand for senior housing specifically, which has a lot of definitions attached to it. So generally speaking, over 5,000 units are needed by 2030. GO is general occupancy rentals. So general rentals, we need over 5,000 as well by 2030. For sale MF, that means for sale multifamily properties. So think condos. There's a demand for that as well, over 2,000 units. And then we have a high demand over 5,000 as well for sale single family dwellings specifically. So we have a lot of need in the next decade. This kind of goes through the numbers by region as well. So as I mentioned, this was a regional study that was completed with Olmsted County, the City of Rochester, and the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing as well. And we identified Destination Medical Center and their need as well, just for the DMC district. If we're talking about affordable units specifically, over 1,000 are needed. We know approximately 3,000 units are needed in general, but just affordable units, over 1,000. You can see how that number increases for the overall demand for affordable units in Rochester, the county, and just in general, the county has a demand for over 18,000 units of housing alone in the next decade. With that, I mentioned it's a large document, and so we've gone through it and it can highlight the top 5 housing gaps that we see as our priorities for our community in addressing our housing needs. We're going to go through them in detail, but what they are is creating home ownership opportunities. Units supplied are not meeting the demand. We need to do more to increase that supply. Increase home ownership for people of color. You'll see some numbers soon, and you'll see that the disparities of our home ownership rates is very significant for BIPOC households in our community, as well as our state, but specifically here. Enhancing housing options for seniors. We know we have an aging population. We know we have a demand, and we're not meeting that demand. It's a specific market that has a need as well. And lastly, we have a great opportunity to preserve our existing affordable housing stock. That is also a need that we have, and want to ensure that affordability is maintained as well. So it's an interesting balance and a lot of needs that we have in our community. With that, I will happily pass it along to my colleague, Dave Dunn from Olmsted County, to go through the details of you of these top 5 gaps. Thank you.
Thanks, Taryn. Before I start, I've got to apologize to 2 people. One is Taryn and one is John Wade. And both of them I'm apologizing to publicly because of my lack of maybe getting things to you in a timely manner. You both are presenting things today on relatively short notice. So I just want to publicly acknowledge that and to say thank you as I get started. And with that, kind of talking about what our needs are. So as Taryn talked about, if any of you are suffering from insomnia, or if the storms were going to keep you up last night or possibly again tonight, I'd encourage you to download the Maxfield study and start digging into the 375 pages of demographic information. Actually, it has a lot of great data in there. And one of the things that we did is we tried to pull out that information and kind of say, okay, what are those core pieces that are really important, right? So if you were to take a look at that and kind of come away with some of those top 5 priorities, these are what they would be. And so the first one that we wanted to highlight, and the other thing I want to say too at the beginning of this, is that these are not in any particular order. This isn't that we have to do one or the other, or that we have to do A and then B. They're all equally a part of what we need to be looking for in the community. So as we look at these, I just wanted to kind of raise that at the beginning. So the first one is to create home ownership opportunities. As we look at that, I think it's, this is not just a problem in Rochester, Minnesota or Olmsted County. Of course, this is the problem nationwide. But if we look specifically at Olmsted County and our market demand for new construction of single family homes, that number is about 5,600 between now and 2030. The current pace that we're on gets us about 68% of the way there. So as you can see and you can tell, and as you look at this, the current pace that we're on will not meet the demand. Of course, and we'll talk about this in a few other slides, what impact does that have on the market as a whole? And I think we all probably already know what the answer to that is. But as we look at that and we think about that and we kind of come together today, that's really one of the things that we just want to start kind of grounding with. Now, you're not going to, well, maybe a couple of you with really great eyesight. This is actually the test slide. I'm actually an optometrist. And if you can read the numbers on here, you pass. But one of the things that we want to share, and this information is just for the city of Rochester. So there is a regional story here, but I think the main idea of this is not going to be different if we included all of Olmsted County or even all of the region as a whole. You can see there on those years on the left of the screen, the early 2000s, the city of Rochester was somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 to 1,000 building permits per year for single family homes. So as you look at that and you look at that number, and then you kind of see over time, of course, you can see the recession kind of came through and it just went down. And then we had a little bit of a rebound, and then we've kind of gone up a little bit. But what you can see here, well, maybe what you can't see here, but I will share with you, for those of you like me that have maybe not the best eyesight, is that we went from a high of 962 in 2004. We dropped down as low as 191 in 2011. We bounced back a little bit, but you can see that we're still struggling to really get those numbers up to where they need to be for our region and for our economic growth. So then the other slide I show right after that is you kind of show one graph that goes one way, and then I show another graph that goes another. And I think somewhere my economics teacher would be very proud of me as I look at these things and talk about supply and demand and cost. So this is the median home price that's been sold. Jim Miner here in the front is the person who provides us with all this wonderful information every month. If you don't have his email, if you don't get Jim's emails, get signed up, because he sends so much wonderful information that we use for so many of these presentations. So thank you, Jim. But you can see here that median home sale price has jumped up. So if we were just to take 2017 or 2016, 5 years ago, it was $181,000, the median sale price. That has jumped up this year to $322,000. So if you start to think about what that impact looks like, that lack of affordability is really becoming an issue. And you're seeing it, the most in the neighborhoods like the Elton Hills here in town, the Country Club Manors, these areas that were really those great affordable neighborhoods that you could live, work, raise your family and afford to move into Rochester. They're becoming more and more difficult to get into. So this is just, again, Jim provides us with this great information. And one of the things that he provides us with every month is just kind of a state of the housing market. So what's actually out there today? So if you or your family or your children or somebody was looking for a house in Olmsted County today, what this chart tells you is that if you had a budget of $250,000, you would have 14 active listings to choose from, which is good because last month it was significantly less. I think it was only like 5. So I guess we're going in the right direction. No, I'm kidding. What it shows, and this is one of the unique issues I think with Olmsted County, is that because we're still a relatively small region, the actual number of homes that are available on the market is just extraordinarily low. And so as we talk about our needs as a region, and we talk about economic growth, and we talk about housing that's affordable, this is one of those key drivers of that, and the key drivers of the cost just continuing to go up like you saw in the previous slide. The next area I want to talk about is increasing home ownership for our BIPOC neighbors. So overall, the home ownership rate in Olmsted County is right around 77%. If you were to look for our Black and African-American BIPOC homeowners, that's only 22%. So when you look at the disparities, you see some of the other statistics there, both with incomes and with poverty levels. Now, these numbers are a year old, but unfortunately, they haven't changed significantly at all. You can see there just those differences and that disparities, and it just comes out. And honestly, it's one of those numbers that slaps you in the face as you look at it. And you really do say, we have an issue here that we need to address. This just shows that same thing demographically by trend. And you can see there on the left side, you have your white families, and then you have your African-American or Black families next to it. You can see those disparities. And this was one of the pieces of information that we were able to take from the Maxfield study. And it's updated a little bit since then, but like I said, the story's still the same. That disparity is just out there, and it's something that we need to continue to address. So those are the two areas that we've really highlighted around home ownership options. The other ones are really around kind of rental housing and affordable rental housing. And so the first one here is to create housing options for people at 50% or less of the area median income. And so one of the reasons, I think the first question you might have is, well, why did you pick 50%, right? A lot of your tax credit deals are 60%, and so why 50? And the reason really is that one of the success stories that we've had over the last decade is that we have increased the supply of affordable housing here, at least as far as units brought online as part of the low income housing tax credit and other programs. We brought over 1,300 new units online. So we have had some success in that area. Now, 95% of those have been at that 60% mark, and only 55 out of that 1,300 fall into that 50% or below. And so that's why, as kind of a housing coalition that you'll hear more about later, we really said, let's prioritize those units that serve that 50% and under number. This is just a little bit of information here on what we're seeing with rents that kind of help understand where we've seen them. I think since 2013, this is overall in Olmsted County. Now, to a group like this probably isn't very surprising. But if you go to a Rotary Club or some other organization and you start to share what rents are, this is usually the slide where you'll get people kind of oohing and on a little bit. Because when people think of rent and they think of affordable rents, they think of what they, whether that was the rent that you maybe last had before you became a homeowner, it may be your personal life experience, or maybe you don't, maybe you're starting to see it with your children. But this is where a lot of people get really, astonished that our average rent in Olmsted County right now is $1,258. And in 2013, it was $957. And so you can see there that 24% increase just in the last 7 years. Oh, thought I had a malfunction here. The next one talks about affordable rents. And this is the other place where then the other thing I will hear in just about every conversation that I have with people that maybe aren't involved with housing every day is, how can $920 a month be affordable? And to kind of share that story, and so people understand that in a lot of times it is, yeah, that is what affordable rent is. That's what it looks like in our community. And for many, many people who have been in their house for more than 10 years, that's more than what their mortgage payment is. And so I think just to kind of share the story so people understand when we talk about housing that's affordable and having a community in which people can thrive, this is really the story that we're talking about, is to make sure that people can have a chance to move here and come into our community and grow a family and thrive, and really putting all of those pieces together. Getting a little touchy here. The next thing just to talk about a little bit is some of the cost burden information. So again, I know an awful lot of these have a lot of different slides and they're all available online. So take a look at them afterwards and you can plug in a little bit more. But I think the one thing I want to highlight of all of the numbers on here is that really almost half of all renters in Olmsted County pay more than 30% of their income in rent. So for half of the people who are renting, and we are a prosperous community, right? I mean, if you look at our demographics, if you look at our area median income numbers, if you look at a lot of things, we're a very healthy community. And I can also share that, you know, we're a community demographically that most other places would die to have. And even in our thriving community, 1 out of every 2 people who rent are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And so that is telling us that they are in a lot of ways just one bad day away from real financial difficulties and very difficult situations, whether that's a car issue, whether that's family issue, whether that whatever. I mean, I think one of the things we've all learned is inevitably life happens, right? Something comes up, something occurs, that safety net for so many of our members of our community just isn't there. And so this just talks about in a little more detail what the number of units and affordability is. And you can see here how we've kind of done. It's a little bit different from the last information we've provided, but it again shows really how that 60% number is that dominant number. And then going on to the next area, it's housing options for seniors. So one of the things when we talk about this, I always start with, we're not talking about putting mom and dad in the home. We're talking about giving them choices and options and allowing them the opportunity to either age in place or to have a place in the housing continuum that works for them. And so really, as we look at this, we have had very few senior housing units created over the last 10 years. Only 40 units were delivered out of a demand of almost 2,000 in our community. So as we're looking at this, you know, it's very difficult to find places to live. Of those 893 units, so almost 900 of those units are really subsidized, meaning that the tenants pay 30% of their income in rent every month. So this is a way to make sure that if your sole income is Social Security, for example, that you can continue to have an affordable place to live. Of those 900 units that we have, there's only 10 vacancies. So again, when you talk about just that huge demand and that pent up demand for housing, especially as many members of our community age, just continuing to look at that and to make that an issue and to provide those options is really something that we're looking for. This is just the graphical representation of a lot of what we talked about there. So active adult, just think senior housing without services. Service-based is really where there are some services needed. You can see in both sides, we haven't met the market demand. We've done a little bit better with the service base where we've added 415 units out of the demand of a little over 1,000. But you can see on the just kind of market rate senior project, we've added virtually none over the last 7 years. Now there's a couple of projects that I know of right now that are kind of in the queue to start to chip away at that. But when you have a pent up demand of that much, it will take more than 1 or 2 projects in order to get that met. So finally, the last kind of priority that we talk about is the preservation piece. So it's one thing to build. Of course, the best way to maintain our affordable housing is to preserve what we have. And so we have about 6,000 units that really fall into this category in Olmsted County. And of course, it gets really difficult to measure, you know, your NOAA product or your naturally occurring affordable housing, as we like to call it, without because it isn't tied to any government subsidies. It's not easy to find information on. Really, you have to kind of go out there and do a market study with the complete community and find out what falls into this category. And so looking at that, about 70% of the current housing stock that's out there does meet some of those demands. And so maintaining those units is of the utmost importance. I think all of us can see examples over the last couple of years where we've seen new development occur, we've seen redevelopment occur, which has been great for the community, but one of the bad, you know, maybe one of the impacts has been that we've lost some of our affordable housing units that are maybe in or near downtown or some of the other areas. So what we're really trying to work on right now is getting that community strategy in place to address that issue. And I can say having that ability to be proactive, having that ability to be thoughtful about this is really important to us. And so I think as we look at this and we look at this issue as we move forward, really building that strategy and then, honestly working with a lot of you in this room to make that happen, because in order to have a comprehensive housing preservation strategy, we need to have lenders, we need to have financial tools. We need to have people who are willing to own and operate properties. We need property managers. We need everything, we need maintenance people. We need really across the gamut of folks to help us keep units affordable, to preserve the units that we have in order to continue to allow this to be a community that thrives. And so this is just a little bit of a slide. I won't go too much into it, but it talks about what kind of income levels you see there. I mean, you can see that really it makes sense. Our affordable units are the units that are already here. And they're already here and they're already occupied, and keeping them again is of our utmost importance. So at that time, I think that's my last slide. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions, Kevin.
We have about 20 minutes for questions. We do have a couple of microphones that I think are over by the table in the back. So if folks have questions, really this day is meant. This day is meant to be as helpful as possible for the folks in the audience today. So we're hopeful that you all have questions, because that's what we want to answer and try to help you understand what our needs are as much as possible. Any questions at all? Eric.
I'm just curious about the baseline for that data. I mean, was there a similar market study done in 2013 and so that's sort of the base? So you really did have projections to compare to?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So are these microphones turned on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we had Maxfield come in and do a housing study in 2013, because it's kind of a weird year with probably a part that we should put in the beginning of that as we look back on it. But yes, Maxfield came into the study in 2013 and then they did an update in 2020. So that allowed us to kind of look and see.
You're muted, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson, for that excellent testimony.
Good morning, Cecile Bedore with Common Bond. Have you seen a lot of investor activity with your NOAA properties? That's been quite a phenomenon elsewhere in the state. Just wondering if that's been happening here, or you're just assuming it's on the horizon.
I can comment and give Taryn just a brief second, because Taryn is part of what Taryn does. She oversees rental properties for the City of Rochester. So I think a lot of those end up going through your office. And I think just from what we're seeing, yes, I mean, we're seeing a lot of investor activity. People are very interested in those. I think where we have that sweet spot is probably that, 20 to 40 unit, 20 to 50 unit, the things that kind of fall a little bit underneath the radar of the national investors, where we maybe have an opportunity that's a little more feasible for us to go in and do some preservation work. Because yes, we're, when some of those larger portfolios come out, there's definitely people interested.
Yeah, I would echo Dave's comments in that essentially we're seeing that larger activity in the bigger properties that are renovating and losing that sense of affordability. I'd say naturally, so NOAA properties, we're talking about medium density duplexes to fourplexes. We're seeing a lot of that affordability maintained as much as possible, but not in all cases. So I would say that activity has been minimal. We're seeing a lot more investors invest in owner-occupied units and transitioning them to rentals. I would see something we're keeping an eye on more so, but from the existing affordability perspective, it's our medium density that is being maintained for the most part, and we'd like to preserve.
Any other questions from the audience? If not, I have a few prepared too. All right, I'll jump into one. Hopefully you all can think of one while I'm doing this. So great presentation. And I think it's very helpful to kind of outline the stated priorities that were included in it. How are the city and county and others like the Housing Coalition looking to partner to advance those priorities?
I can start, you can jump in.
Okay.
Dave's usually got the details. So a comment that we're going to probably repeat a lot today is we have a lot of partnerships here, and we want to partner to provide resources and further affordable housing in our community. So a group you're going to hear from today is the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing, which both the city, the county, DMC, and the coalition itself has the Rochester Area Foundation sit at. So I'll let Dave speak to the details, but essentially The pandemic has created an opportunity for us to invest additional resources towards efforts to strategically meet these 5 gaps. So this group is meeting actively right now to establish a housing blueprint and strategies to address each of these priorities. So I'll introduce that to Dave to follow up.
Yeah, I think that in and of itself might be an entire session here, but one of the things that I think we're very fortunate here to have is that we're a big, small town. And by being a big, small town, we know each other and we have relationships. And so I think one of the very, I think, innovative and unique things that we're doing here is that we've been able to have, under the umbrella of the Rochester Area Foundation, we've created this entity called the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing. And what it is, it's a funders collaborative that consists of the partners Taryn talked about, along with a generous, with Mayo Clinic's contribution, both in their time, effort, and talent, but then also their pocketbook, to really create some funding that's available in the community. I know that's a little bit later down the road, but in order for us to do that, one of the things that we did is we've worked together around, again, what are kind of those core pieces. And so that's kind of, as we're laying out the data, all of you, kind of, this is the foundation, looking at what the needs are. And then as we move forward, kind of collectively, we talked about addressing what are some of those funding opportunities, what are some specific areas that we see maybe for some sites, and then ultimately kind of what are the tools and what are the options and how do we move forward and how do we hopefully make those connections? Because truly what we want, and I think one of the things that we do desperately need in our community is that we need more developers. I think, we are just far enough away from the metro area that we get a lot of looks, right? We get a lot of looks, we get a lot of bites, we have a lot of meetings, but we probably have to market ourselves more, especially on the affordable side, because as we're competing, as an area, as a county, we're also competing across the state, not just for funding, but for your time and effort as partners in housing projects. So there's a lot of that here. And really what we're trying to do with the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing is to kind of build that synergy together. And so, our idea is if you talk to one of us, you talk to all of us and really try to work together and how do we make projects happen. And I think I probably maybe answered 2 other questions during that, but
I can add on.
That's great. Keep going. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. We always forget a partner in the coalition, so thanks for adding the Mayo Clinic is a valuable partner and a reason we started the coalition in the first place. Just to also add on to that, things that we're seeing being addressed now in kind of alignment with the housing blueprint and strategies to address these 5 gaps. I would say a lot of the resources you're going to hear about today as it relates to multifamily housing development, you'll see you definitely prioritizing that 50% AMI and below for new units. So that's one thing that we've seen, I would say, since we've looked at these priorities. And I would say we're also seeing more investment in ways to support BIPOC home ownership. We've got a partner here today, 3 Rivers, who has a program for down payment assistance. So we're seeing a lot more, and the county's invested significant money in down payment assistance as well. So we are seeing a lot of activity in that realm. And once again, another objective of today is to think of innovative solutions and ways that we can address this, not just one way. So I would say those are a couple that we're seeing now, and then you'll also hear about other programs in place to both incentivize and support and see what we can do to further the supply of homeownership units in general. I'd say those 3 of the top 5 are seeing a lot of activity right away.
Great. Jose has a question up here for microphone. Give me 1 second, just for the people watching remotely, the microphone. helps.
Did the Maxfield study consider or take into account the need for temporary housing, like affordable lodging, and the pressure that the lack of affordable lodging has put on the existing stock of affordable housing, because it puts pressure on those becoming Airbnbs and being taken off the affordability portion? Was that considered in the Maxfield study?
yeah, I'll jump in and then I'll let Taryn kind of provide the city's perspective on this. I think one of the things with the short answer is no. I think it's a difficult thing to try to quantify from the traditional housing demand sense of the visitors that come in and how many of them here. Of course, we know that are in this market, we know that's a very unique piece. And we know that the short-term rentals, and any one of us who, I think if you live in Rochester long enough, you'll go through, unfortunately, one part of your life where probably somebody will be doubled up with you for a little bit of time because they're here for some kind of medical procedure, right? I mean, I know I've gone through it. I know most of my coworkers have at one time. And so it's a huge demand on our community. And I think as we look at the numbers, it's always one of those things that skews them a little bit, to be just very honest, because that's a hard thing to quantify in the traditional sense of how many of those people are coming in and then putting it into a housing study. Now, I know that the city is doing some work on the short-term rental as kind of an issue, and how do we address that in relationship to demand of the overall housing market. And I'll let Taryn maybe just highlight that.
Yeah, I can more or less just provide some statistics on short-term rentals specifically as a new space that we've kind of taken action in, I would say. So what we're observing in Rochester specifically, if you're curious to know, right now we have about 500 short-term rental units on the market. We have over 16,000 long-term rental units. So to just give you an idea of the comparison, after the pandemic, states in general saw different increases and decreases in the number of short-term rentals. You'd think we'd have an increase, but actually Minnesota as a state experienced about a 1% decrease in short-term rental unit stays after the pandemic. So it's a fluid market, I would say, and it has some impact, but not as much, I think, as we had anticipated after the pandemic. But what's come of that is we now regulate short-term rentals as long-term rentals. So I would say my observation in my field is a lot of folks are here for longer periods for medical stays and are able to use different dwellings for that as well. So that could certainly have an impact on the market if they're staying in long-term rentals. And it's not something we studied, but those are just some observations.
One thing I want to, call out or ask a question about that's probably on the mind of some of the housing providers in this room is the intersection between regulatory oversight and affordability. So just as an example, I can get a basement egress window installed anywhere else in the state of Minnesota for about $2,000. In Rochester, it cost me about $3,500 due to the regulatory oversight kind of concerns that are here. When I try to work with other developers from outside Rochester, that's kind of the first thing they throw out is, hey, isn't that a tough town to do business? And I know there's a measure through City Council right now that is going to add additional regulatory challenges for housing providers, for rental housing providers. So if there's, let's say, a potential $5,000 out-of-pocket cost to upcode a rental unit, I mean that translates directly into, say, a $50 per month rent increase to the tenant. So I just want to know, are the city departments kind of talking to each other to understand that intersection between, regulatory, compliance and making sure we have safe housing, and then how that affects the affordability component? Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. So what I would say, it's definitely always a tough balance to strike in both preserving affordability and furthering that, and also ensuring safety. So Nick's largely talking about rental regulation specifically. So in the state of Minnesota, cities can elect to have rental regulation. So the city of Rochester does, a lot of large cities do, small communities don't. So that's where you're going to see differences in markets and regulations, if you will. I would say the city of Rochester specifically adopted an updated housing code to match an international property maintenance code. So essentially, if you are new to the rental market in Rochester and have dwellings in other communities, it's a similar policy, I would say. So that was adopted to create more comparison and be able to benchmark ourselves to other communities. So I would say, yes, we are certainly talking to other departments and other agencies as we make these policy decisions. And it's a tough conversation because we're always looking to further both safety and affordable housing. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, just one thing, I probably should have sat over here because I can't look at this whole side of the room. I feel like just looking right in this corner. But one thing I just want to add on the issue of cost too, I think one of Olmsted County's legislative platform items for the past several years has really been asking for an opportunity with building code to analyze costs and benefits, right? So none of us here want this building to collapse. None of us here want this building to be anything but of the utmost levels of safety. But as we look at that, striking that balance between what are the costs and what are the benefits of some of the regulatory environment, that's been something that Olmsted County has been, advocating for that honestly hasn't gotten a lot of traction, unfortunately, at the legislature. And I'm not going to sit here and talk legislative solutions in housing because that would be a whole other day-long summit. But I do think as we start to think about it, there's, in my mind, there is what I think of like the reasonable middle in a lot of these things. So all of us want safe housing, but all of us, so you can build like the cheapest thing that you could build and it may not last very long and it may not be very safe, right? Or you can build a fortress that might last through Armageddon, but it might not be affordable to anybody. And so how do you balance those things? And I think, honestly, I think that's a conversation that with housing that we need to be having as people who are involved in this effort, as people who are even, involved in creating affordable communities, to really sit down and say, okay, what can we do? And a lot of it is beyond, some of it is municipalities, some of it's counties, but a lot of it's at the state level too. And I don't think it's a partisan issue. And that's why I get excited about the opportunities with it, because I really think that we could come together collectively and say, okay, this is what the cost of that is. This is the benefit, and just have that as part of that evaluation.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Allison. We also have people joining remotely, so we might have a Zoom question. So I think that's what's happening.
Yes, we have a virtual attendee asking, how is the coalition incentivizing prioritizing home ownership specifically for immigrant families?
I can go ahead.
That's a great question. I would say we're pretty early on in our process of investigating strategies to further homeownership opportunities for, I'll use the acronym BIPOC households. So we're actually just at a point, and I'm sure the coalition might touch on this later today. In about a month, we're going to initiate a co-design group to have representatives of that population that work in housing or experience concerns of gaining home ownership, to get a better idea of what their barriers are and come up with strategies. So I would say, to my knowledge, that's a great question and not been identified as a specific area, but I can certainly imagine that it's going to come up in our conversation with this group and co-design as we move forward. Anything else?
Yeah, I just add, I think for us, what we want to do is, we want to take the time and look at this and bring the voices of the people of the BIPOC members of our community into the conversation. It's one thing for me to kind of put my values on what that should look like. And so what we're trying to do is take the time and to work with our community to really find out what the values are and what the issues are. So it's not something where it's us projecting our thoughts and ideas onto the community, but really trying to learn what it is that we need to do in order to be more successful.
Really good question.
Good morning. I want to say thank you to everyone for bringing this forward, and love the photograph of Olmsted Terrace, one of our HRA housing developments here within Olmsted County. And note all of the green space. One of the concerns I have moving forward is the exorbitant land costs that we have here and the minimums that are going to be required in the future for building. And we're going to be losing that green space, places for children to play, throw a ball, play catch, grow food, and just kind of relax and hang out. So when I hear the term invest used, I'm hearing that used for developers, for folks who maybe want to profit, but I don't hear the term invest being applied to, per se, single family owner occupied houses. I believe that developers have every much right to invest, as our 50% AMI folks do. So how do we skew that instead of just welcoming in 40 to 60, 100 place developers to actually somehow work to give land or grant land, subsidize land, so that folks who are less able to own their home that they live in be able to actually do that?
Yeah, I think it's, when we talk about it, if I go back to the real big picture here, I think one of the things that we talk about, this is the continuum, right? The housing continuum, and going everywhere from You know, we're not talking about people experiencing homelessness today, but people experiencing homelessness and housing with services all the way up through home ownership. And one of the things that we talk about kind of as a community is we need to have choices and options all along that continuum. So it's not just any one place that we really need to be investing. It's all along that continuum to make it a healthy opportunity for people to, you know, maybe come into town as young professionals and have a place to live that they can afford, that then they can maybe look into home ownership when the time's right. If they want to start a family, maybe they grow into that family home and they can become empty nesters. And I think for us, you know, that's that healthy housing continuum and healthy housing choices that we're striving to have. And it's not just here, it's all over the country. But I think for us, that's really what we're trying to accomplish in the big picture. And that will require partnerships all steps of the way, and every piece of that, everywhere from we need large single family homes on 2-acre plus lots. That is a demand in our community. We also need subdivisions that are maybe smaller scale single family homes. We need opportunities for condominium and other living, and we need apartments for people, because we know that different people have different choices, want different choices and values. And in order for us to thrive as a community, we have to provide that as we grow. And that's really where I think we have to look at an all of the above approach.
Yeah, I would agree. And just to echo Dave's points, it takes all of us, and this is one component of our housing needs. And you'll hear more about some of the resources and things we're doing to kind of create those opportunities for households for home ownership specifically. We've got incremental things we're doing, and we've got plans for big things, right? We'll talk a little bit about city and county parcels and things that we want to do to take those to create opportunities for home ownership. For example, as I mentioned, we've got programs and a lot of resources available for down payment assistance, and we're having those bigger conversations of how do we incentivize supply, what are the barriers, and there's a lot of them. So it certainly takes a lot, as I'm sure you're very, very familiar with. So I would say that that value is not lost in our prioritization either, and definitely a valid point of other ways to be investing and create those opportunities for investment for households. So thanks for bringing that up.
Probably have time for one more question. All right, if not, I can field this one. So we heard a little bit about stated priorities. We heard a little bit about the financial tools. We'll hear more about those later. So for the developers in the audience, what are their next steps, or how can they engage if they're intrigued by what they're hearing and have some concepts that they'd like to explore further?
Yeah, sure. I would say please reach out to us. If we still have the clicker, the next slide has our names, and we're going to talk about that later today. Kind of first point of contact, since we all partner, we'll all refer you to the right group. So as I mentioned, we're hoping to kind of inspire you for innovative ideas and give you some ideas of what our biggest needs are. So I would say please reach out to us if any of these particular areas of interest, so we can connect you to the right party, or we can be the ones to talk you through it. So that's what I would say. Anything you would add?
No, not really. I think he handled it real well.
Great. Well, thank you, Dave and Taryn, for presenting today. That was really helpful. Can we get a round of applause for them? All right, before our next panel, we have about a 5-minute break for coffee fill-ups, bathrooms. Coffee's in the back, bathrooms are out in the hallway to the right. One thing I did want to mention is you're going to have a lot of information thrown at you and a lot of presentations. You do have a packet in front of you today. Within it is a QR code. You may not be familiar with these, but you can take a picture of it with your phone. It'll bring you to a Dropbox where you can download all of the data from which these presentations are drawn from and all the presentations themselves. So a good resource to have. We'll get started in 5 minutes. All right. Thank you. Before we get started with the next part, I did want to acknowledge and thank our gold sponsors for today, which are Lattice, Think Bank, and Home Federal. If we get a quick round of applause for sponsors making this day happen, thank you. All right. The next session that we have is the purpose of it is really try to answer the question, what changes have happened in the city's zoning or procedures that help with housing outcomes? And to help answer that question, we have Ryan Yetzer, the Deputy Director for Community Development from the City of Rochester. Round of applause for Ryan.
Good morning. Thanks everyone for being here, and special thanks to DMC folks for inviting me to come talk about zoning. Not necessarily the most exciting topic typically, but certainly plays a role in affordable housing. So I'm excited to be here and talking about some of the changes that we've been working on over the last handful of years. So to start, I'm going to jump right into the city's comprehensive plan, and I'll go through these first handful of slides relatively quickly, but it's important that we start here at the comprehensive plan because the comprehensive plan really informs everything we do in terms of future zoning and future planning, and not just for zoning and planning, which I'll get into here in a moment, but the city adopted a new comprehensive plan in 2018. It had been a long time since the city had overhauled their comp plan. Certainly there had been updates and edits made along the way, but to kind of take a step back and create a whole new vision on it was a big step. Some of the folks in this room, certainly a lot of the folks in this room contributed to this process. One of them being your former speaker or the previous speaker, Dave. So special thanks to them for the work they did in presenting this great plan to us. P2S 2040 is what we refer to the comp plan as, really sets the foundation for the city of Rochester. It informs all of the other plans that we have. So when you think about planning, there's so many different plans. There is the Parks and Rec Master Plan, there is the Sanitary Sewer Master Plan, and so on and so forth. And so it's important to keep in mind that we have P2S 2040 that sets the foundation and informs all of those other plans and provides that guidance and direction and policy direction for our city. The comprehensive plan is built off of 7 foundational principles, all of which I could make an argument have an aspect in the conversation today, but the 3 I'll call attention to is expand affordable housing, emphasize fiscal sustainability, and integrate land use and transportation. All 3 of those foundational principles certainly play a role in affordable housing and affordable living. P2S 2040 includes 21 goals supported by 91 policies. So when we look at bringing policy changes or zoning changes, or even when we look at reviewing certain applications, we certainly take a close look at what are the city's goals and policies as adopted by the comprehensive plan, and does this policy application, et cetera, is that supported by the goals and policies of the comp plan? The 2 goals that I've provided at the bottom, that is goal number 1 and goal number 2 right out of the comprehensive plan. So utilizing utilizing the urban growth area and to provide cost-effective development. And then number 2 of increasing housing diversity and supply. So this conversation today is certainly a major aspect of the comprehensive plan. So this is the timeline that we've provided specifically for the zoning code project that we're working on, which I'll touch on a little later in the presentation. But I think this timeline is important to point out, and it touches on all 3 of the topics that I want to talk about today. So which are infill and redevelopment, transit-oriented development, and then just a general zoning code update. And this timeline encompasses all 3 of those things, but it shows that this has been a long road for from a planning and zoning purpose. It started back in 2014 when the city and county consolidated planning department at that time took on rewriting the comprehensive plan. And as we go down this timeline, in January of 2018, the city knew that infill and redevelopment and primary transit network, which I'll touch on, were 2 of the key aspects that we're formulating out of the comprehensive plan, which was later adopted that year. So we kicked off a project to create some new zoning districts to meet those needs. In the summer of 2019, those zoning districts were officially adopted and mapped, which I'll touch on. And then since that time, we have been working on a zoning code rewrite, which certainly will have an impact on affordable housing, or at least we hope it does. So we've been working on that since the January of 2020, and we are hoping that process is coming to an end. We hope to have a new zoning ordinance to consider adoption in the middle of this year, with a target implementation date of January 1st, 2023. Before I jump into the topics I want to talk about, I want to spend a second on this slide, because as the previous presenters talked about, this isn't an issue that's unique to Rochester. This is an issue that is happening all over the country. I was lucky enough to go to the National APA conference last week And these are some takeaways from the slides, right out of the slides from the National APA Conference. Certainly there was a number of sessions on affordable housing. And this particular one was how upzoning impacts affordable housing. And I don't like to read slides, but I'm going to read a couple of these bullet points because I think it's important to keep in mind. So upzoning alone cannot solve the affordability problem, but it's very difficult to think of a solution that doesn't include upzoning. So just something to think about. Increasing housing supply in areas that already have infrastructure and services is much less expensive than doing it on raw land. So it gets into the infill and redevelopment that I'll talk about here in a moment. The way to produce affordable housing is by allowing ADUs and missing middle itself. So again, that gets into the infill and redevelopment aspects. And then lastly, kind of the phrase of the conference was microeconomics doesn't care if you believe it or not. And so the point there is we have to create more units, regardless of the cost of those units. It will have an impact on microeconomics, which Dave kind of talked about too, supply and demand, right? And so if we're producing more units and the cost isn't going down, it's not because economics isn't real, it's because we're not producing enough units. We still aren't meeting the demand. So with that, I'll jump into the two sort of new zoning districts that we've had. So these are maps right out of the comprehensive plan. The one on, let's see, the left touches on the primary transit network, which is informed our TOD zoning district, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on. And then the map on the right forecasted where we implemented our R2X zoning district for the purpose of infill and redevelopment. So infill and redevelopment, also known as R2X now, so you'll hear me use those interchangeably. The goal of that zoning district was to provide a greater share of urban growth using infill and redevelopment techniques. So providing housing options in areas that support our transportation goals. And this is goal 8, right out of the comprehensive plan, was to provide a greater share of future urban growth using infill and redevelopment techniques. So we knew that the creation of a TO or of an R2X type district was a goal of the city. It's right there in one of the 21 goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. Transit-oriented development, similar story. Goal 6 of the comprehensive plan states to develop node and corridor-based transit-oriented development opportunities. This resulted in the TOD zoning district. You know, all of the things when we think about TOD, active pedestrian spaces, mixture of uses, providing places where people want to be. The map on the bottom is the route of the Link Rapid Transit, which Jarrett will talk about here in a little bit, but that is a perfect example of what TOD should look like. So as that timeline touched on, this obviously isn't the easiest map to see, but this is the map that was used in 2019 to place the zoning districts that I've just talked about. So the transit-oriented development zoning district is kind of a spine along North and South Broadway, 4th Street and 2nd Street. And then the R2X zoning district surrounds the downtown. And again, this is going back to those foundational principles. This is really hitting some of those foundational principles and expanding housing options, integrating land use and transportation, putting people near where they can work and live, and all those sorts of things without needing to expand our city as a whole. So infill and redevelopment, what do I mean by that? So a couple different types of housing. Certainly small lot, single family is a piece of that. We were strategic in picking the minimum lot size for R2X. It is a viable option to take previously what was 1 lot and make it 2 lots. And now you've potentially doubled the density of a neighborhood. Single family attached ADUs, attached dwellings, all certainly part of that infill housing option solution. And then reasonably scaled multifamily development is an option within the new R2X zoning district. So as I said, this was implemented in 2019. We have seen a small number of R2X projects come through to increase a sprinkle of density is what we would talk about of a small increase while still maintaining that low density residential feel. And so here are some examples of what those projects could look like. As for TOD, I'm excited about that. We have 3 really good examples that are going through the process right now. So the brick apartments, which I think a lot of folks are familiar with, is producing 180 units on previously vacant land right along the TOD. And this is a great example of the TOD zoning district because it's a pretty substantial project that was able to get all the way through the entitlement process at a staff level, which to developers in the room know what that means for a development process. And then the other one, which unfortunately the pictures are flipped, but Benaya on Broadway, this one is just getting started and also a good TOD project went through the entitlement process at a staff level and is producing 27 units, almost right across the street from the brick apartments. And the last one I'll highlight is from First Homes, the row home project, providing 6 units on what was previously 1 unit in a vacant parcel. So all 3 great examples, again, received the entitlements through a staff level approval, which was one of the primary goals of the TOD district in the first place. So TOD and Archrex aside, the other project that we're working on and have been working on since the beginning of 2020 is rewriting the city's zoning ordinance. So we had this new comprehensive plan adopted in 2018, and we were left in a situation where we had a comprehensive plan that had clear goals and policies and a zoning ordinance that somewhat lagged behind some of those things. And so rather than try to fix them in a one-off fashion, we decided to take a step back and move slow to move fast and rewrite the whole zoning ordinance. So our goal of this project is to bring the development practices of Rochester into the 21st century. So why did we do this? What isn't working currently? Well, like I said, first and foremost, it's about aligning our code, aligning our laws with the ideas put forward in the comprehensive plan. So that is the main driver behind this, but there are other aspects too. Development approvals at times can be time consuming depending on the project. And well, I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Standards currently don't necessarily reflect industry best practice, especially for a urban style of a city. And so Rochester is unique in that way where we have edge growth, but we also have an urban area. And how do we balance those in our zoning ordinance? Incentive and restricted development, for folks in the room who develop properties know what those words mean, but they became the norm rather than the exception the way they were probably previously intended. And so that told us that there was a problem with the base standards themselves and we needed to take a look at those. And then other things of just becoming a little bit difficult to administer and complex for folks to understand between the different PUD special districts and overlay districts like the downtown parking overlay zone, which is what DPOZ stands for. And if you've ever read that zoning, that district, you know just how confusing it is. So what does the UDC do, the new zoning ordinance, what does it do to support affordable housing? Well, it reduces minimum lot sizes throughout the city in all zoning districts. The graphic at the bottom shows our lowest single family home zoning district that we're proposing. So there is actually a zoning district that has even smaller lots than this, but it's not what we would consider more of our single family home zoning district. So we didn't choose that one to compare, but smaller lot sizes throughout the city. These are minimums, so there is no requirement to do smaller lots, but we certainly want to provide that option. And we talk about having housing options. We have to open that up a little bit to let the market solve those problems. Removing artificial densities. This is a big one that we talk about in a national best practice. So what I mean by that is currently in our R3 zoning district and in our other more intense residential zoning districts, we have a density limit. So you could show me a site plan and say, I have more than enough parking spaces, I'm under the maximum height, I'm under the floor area ratio, and I could get 100 units in here, but because of that density limit, I can only have 52 or something like that. I'm just making numbers up. And so, and that is a standard that used to be used a lot, but with the need for affordable housing, it's becoming an industry best practice to pull that piece out. And rather than control the density through a number that you've chosen, control the density through the box itself. So how tall does the building need to be? How many parking spaces do you need per unit? How long can the building be? And once we've set those parameters, let the market dictate how many units you can get in there. And it really operates in a similar fashion. So that's a big change for us. the rest of these, maybe are a little bit smaller changes, but we've removed some of our districts that require large lots. And then we've added some affordable housing incentives that we're able to approve at a staff level, which is different now. All incentive projects go through city council. So that's a big change as well. So accessory dwelling units, this is a big change. We are permitting accessory dwelling units in all, or we're proposing to permit accessory dwelling units in all residential districts citywide. Currently, they are only allowed in the R2X zoning district. This, of course, has an impact as new houses develop. They can take in this product into consideration, which certainly helps with the cost of rather than having to come back after the fact. What is an ADU? It's a small unit, a small secondary unit on your lot in the rear yard. So it could be above a garage. It could be, you could have a garage and a standalone unit. It could be in the same unit that you already have. Here are the standards for the ADUs. I won't go through them all in great detail, but I do want to point out a couple of them. So as I said, permitted in all residential zoning districts, no more than one per lot. And in our single family home zoning district, so in our R1 zoning district, if you build an ADU, the owner must occupy one of the two units. And there is a reason for that. Our reasoning behind that is that how is an ADU fundamentally different than a duplex? And so we just matched, if you can do a duplex or more, then that standard doesn't exist in those zoning districts, but in zoning districts where it's really meant to be more single family, we have proposed that the owner must live in either of the two units. Maximum square footage of 100,000 square feet. We've greatly reduced setbacks and really tried to match industry best standard or industry best standards on how to produce ADUs. And so we're anxious for this to kind of catch on and see what kind of impact this can have going forward. Let's see, I think I have a couple more. Yep. So this is just an example of how you could lay out a lot for an ADU. So, the side yard minimum, again, we've tried to match industry best standards. So matching that of the principal structure. Same with how close it can be to the primary structure. A lot of codes will say, well, you've got to set back, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet from the primary structure. And we're removing that barrier and saying it just has to meet building code for space of structures. You do have to maintain a rear yard setback, just like you would with a single family home. So we feel like these standards are at a good place, and we're just hoping that this idea can catch on and start having an impact on the affordable housing being a piece of the solution. So the other thing is, I think this is the last thing I'm touching on specifically related to UDC. We talk about process improvement. And one of the things I talked about earlier is how incentive and restricted development had become the norm, and how that poses challenges for developers and for neighbors, residents near those developments. Is it's kind of an unpredictable process. And so we have worked very hard to create a more predictable process, which the folks who work on development in the room will tell you that alone can have an impact on the affordability of a project. Creating a process where somebody knows going into it that if I do X, Y, and Z, my project is going to go forward. Not I do X, Y, and Z, and then I ask to see if that is workable. So it's something that we're working hard to produce, and we think it provides benefit community-wide, not just to affordability of projects, but to residents and neighbors that live near those, to know what can happen by them. Not, well, this is what the rules are, but if they go in and ask for special permissions, they can get around them. So we really feel like that can have a great impact. The other thing, we've done everything that we feel like we can do to allow applications to be approved at a staff level that should be approved at a staff level for one reason or another. State statute limits this to a degree, but some of the things like minor plats, general development plans, easement vacations, substantial land alterations, we're proposing those to be moved back to a staff level, again, with the overall with the overall goal of increasing predictability and reducing that overall timeline, which both can have a major impact on affordability. So with that, I'll plug it. As I said, we are wrapping up our UDC project. This summer, we are doing a handful of engagement sessions. We have sort of transformed into more of an informed type of engagement of making sure people know what is going on. And we really try hard to gear our engagement towards the folks in the room. So if we're talking to developers who are asking about, their floodplain CUP, that's a very different conversation than talking to a resident who didn't know zoning existed and wonders if they can still have a shed. And so we're trying hard to have those conversations with anyone who's interested and anyone who will listen to us talk about it. So here are some engagement events. I would ask and encourage you to share these with your networks. And if you would have a group of people that you think we should come talk to, we'd be happy to do that. And with that, I will stand for any questions. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for questions. Anyone in the audience? Like we got Jose has a question here.
The cost of permitting, and some of this applies to planning, some of it applies to building safety. With the cost of construction going up, building permits, the cost of building permits is tied to the cost of construction. Could we look at, maybe the city having a flat fee per dwelling unit, for example, for the cost or how we price plan reviews and permits?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jose. And it's a timely question because we were actually just talking about that of how the market, making construction costs and all that, having the value go up, as that directly impacts the cost of a building permit. And so it's something we're watching closely to see how that impacts the numbers. I'm not an expert on what our legal ability is to vary that. I know there is some state oversight on how building permits are calculated and charged and all those sorts of things. There are state fees within them as well that we don't have the authority to mess with, but it's definitely a good question and something we as a city need to keep a close eye on and keep our options open. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ryan? I found it too. Oh, we got one up here.
Mick Conlon with Ramsey Development. I just wondered, are you addressing parking minimums with the new code, and maybe you can talk about where that's headed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a piece of affordability that probably should be on that slide that I didn't add, but we have drastically reduced parking minimums throughout the city. We have introduced parking maximums as well in some areas that didn't previously have them, but to give a flavor of where that's going, anyone who works under our current zoning ordinance knows how complex our parking minimums are, particularly in R3. It depends on how many bedrooms the units are and all those sorts of things. But as a general rule, we're somewhere between 1.5 to 2 parking spaces per unit. And in the UDC in our R3 zoning district, we have dropped that to 0.5 spaces per unit. So we are drastically dropping those in multifamily projects.
Any last questions? All right, if not, let's give Ryan a round of applause.
Thank you.
Ryan. And we have another quick panel to bring to the floor here. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jarrett Hubbard, who's a project manager for the City of Rochester, Josh Johnson, the interim community development director from the City of Rochester, and Scott Ramsey, the manager of facilities and properties for the City of Rochester. So we'll let them get to the stage, and really what this second panel that we're hoping to, the questions that we're hoping to kind of answer here are what are the infrastructure projects we're working on where housing can be part of the solution. So how does infrastructure influence housing and vice versa? So I think we have Jared up first.
Oh, I am up first.
And then these will be pretty quick, and we'll also have kind of a short time for questions before the next break. So thanks everyone for your patience, and I'll let Ryan or Jared get started.
Hello, everyone. Jarrett Hubbard, project manager for the City of Rochester, focused in on Link Rapid Transit. take you really quickly through what Link Rapid Transit is and kind of where we're headed with it. There we go. Just like Ryan did in the previous presentation, talking about where we've come from. Downtown, increased frequency downtown transportation has been a kind of a plan of the cities for over a decade now. Ryan talked about the primary transit network, the bigger picture of where we're headed when it comes to high frequency public transportation. He had a map you can see here on the right, just an updated version of that same map of where we're looking at doing that in the future coming out of the comprehensive plan. In short, Link Rapid Transit is a 2.8 mile high frequency bus rapid transit route, or BRT for short. Extends from the far west side of near Cascade Lake Park, what is currently Mayo's West parking lot. Extends down Second Street all the way to downtown, so it reaches 3rd Avenue, goes down 3rd Avenue to 6th Street, and then vice versa, back and forth on that route. In big picture, it is 7 stations with 12 platforms. Service would be provided at those platforms every 5 minutes. That means a bus would come to a platform every 5 minutes during the peak. That would be in the morning and afternoon. And then every about 10 to 15 minutes in the off-peak, middle of the day, and then on the weekends. We expect to take about 20 minutes to get from one end to the other, with the opening day at ridership about 11,000. This would be one of the big things that I cannot overemphasize, is that this is Link Rapid Transit is a different type of transit service than what we currently experience with Rochester Public Transit. And one of the biggest things, besides the frequency going down the 5 or 10 minute frequency, is that longer service hours. You can see on the screen what our proposed service hours are at the current moment. Big picture, as we move forward, we hope to have the service up and operating in the spring of 2026, excuse me. We would do construction primarily in 24 and 25, with maybe starting in 2023. We're currently going through a process of doing environmental research that's required of it being a partial federal transportation administration project, an FTA project, and we're going through advanced design at the current moment. Again, we're re-emphasize the fact that this is a different type of transit service than what we have existing and what we might be experiencing. I just used this slide to say, if anyone has used the light rail system, the blue or green line system in the Twin Cities, the station platforms will look much more like those, elevated, wide, long, as you can see with this image, with additional amenities that would include heat and digital displays that would let you know when the next bus is coming, just like at the light rail in the Twin Cities. Next couple images are just kind of some of the additional type of features that we're planning on doing at St. Mary's and at 2nd Avenue, two of our key high volume stations, and particularly trying to get access to direct access off the platform into the subway systems at those 2 locations. I was asked, with this being the housing summit, how it connects to housing. Brian did a really nice job of introducing the fact of the TOD zoning. With the TOD zoning, the city did go ahead in 2020 and go through what's known as a transit-oriented development planning study. Big picture, the way I like to talk about it is to really try to show that connection between transit and land use and how each one of those can tie together and can affect and make a better system and better community. Big picture, that vision planned out prioritized well-being, strong neighborhood connections, and guide smart growth, which Ryan kind of just went through a second ago. The plan did kind of outline or group stations and sections of the line together to kind of create kind of a comprehensive plan for how those corridors and what development in those corridors should look like. And so that's why I just used this slide. And also in this slide, in this map, you can see that there is the yellow parcels that are in the map are kind of parcels that are underdeveloped according to that TOD zone that Ryan presented just a second ago. One of the unique things, you've heard Dave Dunn talk about some of the economic and housing staff. We actually utilized the same team that did that work to utilize for the TOD zoning or TOD planning study. One of the unique things they did was they looked at similar systems across the country, high frequency bus rapid transit routes, and what they meant for growth in those corridors. And what you can see here is from that determination of looking at those examples, the exponential factor of how high frequency transit could help elevate and increase the amount of development within the corridor and along the corridor. One of the last things I'll just point out is big picture, some of the takeaways, economic development takeaways from it were continued development of the DMC in the Discovery Zone District, continued increased zoning, increased housing, particularly supply of housing downtown, and then the increased affordability, all things that you've heard over and over again here today. With that, I'll hand it off to whoever's next.
How's everybody doing? As Kevin introduced me, I'm Josh Johnson. I'm the interim community development director for the city of Rochester, also project manager for DMC projects such as Heart of the City and Discovery Walk, which we'll be talking about Discovery Walk a little bit today. So just going over some of the basics of Discovery Walk, what was it informed by? So Discovery Walk was developed in combination with Heart of the City as the two leading initiatives with the DMC master plan. And Discovery Walk was really meant to be the catalyst of the connection of the Discovery Square district, where we're seeing, one Discovery Square, two Discovery Squares, sort of those science and medical industries combining there. So initially in 2016, there was a design charrette with local community members, and they identified these key principles of what Discovery Walk should be, what it should feel like, and these sort of guided our planning then going forward. Discovery Walk is a lot of things. It's a street reconstruction project. It's a public realm project. It's a 4-block linear park, but it's not necessarily technically a park, but it feels like it. So it's a lot of things, but really what it is it's a connection to downtown, to Soldiers Field. So a big priority is how do we get people that are downtown in our urban environment and get them to these other great amenities that we have in Rochester, like Soldiers Field. So I'm going to steal some key principles from Jeff Speck, who's an author and planner. The walking principles are, in order to get people to walk to a destination, it needs to be a useful walk, it needs to feel safe, it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be interesting. So all of those 4 principles are included within the Discovery Walk project. And the intent is to make it, it's only about a 0.5 mile walk from the center of downtown, from the Gonda to Soldiers Field. But how can we make it interesting? How can we make it feel safe? How can we actually entice people to make that walk? The other part is we went through a lot of different design ideas of what we should put in Discovery Walk. There was suggestions of, should we have an ice skating rink? Should we have a playground? Should we have other types of recreational elements within Discovery Walk? And we realized we already have those existing amenities in Soldiers Field. In the winter, we have an ice skating rink. We have 2 playgrounds. We've got a golf course. We've got a swimming pool. We've got, all of those features. So how do we entice people to get there? How do we enhance them instead of duplicate them? I'm going to go a little out of order with slides here. I'm gonna start with this. So I think Councilmember Kirkpatrick made a great point when we talk about housing, and I was trying to think, how do I get the audience to see the link between a street project and how does it impact housing? And I think there's a lot of amenities and there's a lot of interplay between the two. One of those is, how do we get people adequate and equitable access to public space? And this is the way we do it. So downtown land's expensive. The technical term would be it's very, very expensive. So in order to have access to single family, it really prices out a majority of our population. So how do we get people to be able to live downtown next to the services they need, next to employment, next to transportation, like Jarrett mentioned, but also get them places where they can be outside, experience nature, and get fresh air. And this is one of those ways we do it. If we look at, it's expensive to buy land. Downtown's relatively built out. So where do we find that land to create the parks? I think we look at, what does the city own most of? What's the highest percentage of land that the city owns downtown? I'd say it's streets. So how do we look at our streets differently? How do we make them people-centric instead of auto-centric? So this is the way we did it. This is just a graphic of currently what's, I believe, a 5-foot wide traffic lane and narrow it down to the most narrow street that we can do with still making it accessible to two-way traffic and also accessible to emergency service vehicles, to get where they need to go, ambulances, fire trucks, and so forth. So this is really the catalyst of the design. You can see the bottom where we took a lot of the street and made it more pedestrian focused with seating, other amenities, which I'll go over a little bit. Let's go back here. So the design would influence, like I say, it's 4 blocks. We refer to them as the 200 block, the 300 block, the 400 block, and the 500 block. And each block is meant to provide a different experience. What we learned through the pandemic is, public spaces need to be resilient. They need to be adaptable to the needs of the people, what's going on. So the space was designed where you can close off a block, you can close off an intersection for neighborhood events or community events, or you can close down the whole street for city events or regional events. We also, all of this design was informed by what Kevin Bright and Jess Roberts with University of Minnesota Design Center established as our co-design process, where we didn't have developers, we didn't have those big players sit on that. We had people that worked in the clinic, they had medical backgrounds, they might be small business owners, but really they're just community members. That was what you needed to be on the co-design process. And what they told us is, different communities use the space differently. Some people want reflective, quiet spaces. Some people want more interactive social spaces. Some people use, or some communities use the space at different times of day. Like they like to use them in the evening. So lighting is very important. So we took all that feedback and tried to insert it into the design. The other thing I want to mention is, we talked about housing, we talked about transportation, and one of the ways I think this, like Discover a Walk, is one of those places that we call the third place. It's the spot between your home and your work where you socialize and you gather and you get together. So that's another reason why I just think it's so important to have these spaces in our community. Just giving you sort of a taste of one block. I don't have enough time to go through each block by block, but here's one of those spaces where I'd say we built in adaptability. So this is what we call the 300 block or the food truck block. It could be a farmer's market, it could be a night market, it could be food trucks, but we built infrastructure along the street. I don't know if you can see on this image if it's big enough, but we actually put spaces in between those trees with infrastructure for electricity, so you don't have to run generators, cuts down on noise, makes it more pleasant to be around. And then we, obviously have ample seating and green space just for sort of flex spaces for however you want to use it. Discovery Walk, areas of opportunity. So there's symbiotic or a mutually beneficial relationship between streets and housing. I read recently that a housing strategy is a retail strategy because retail follows rooftops, right? So retailers and developers are going to look at traffic counts, they're going to look at foot traffic counts, and that's going to be sort of their deciding factors on where to locate a retail business or a development. And we've learned, especially once again with the pandemic, that we can't rely on just a certain class of employees or services to provide the traffic that we need for all of our businesses downtown. So we need to have a higher critical mass of people that live downtown and work downtown, so that after 5 p.m., we still have that foot traffic for people that actually live downtown, not only work downtown, especially on the weekends. We need people to live downtown, so on weekends they're utilizing those neighborhood retail services, restaurant, shopping, all those other amenities. I'd also say, so in this image, and it's kind of hard to decipher, but what I'm trying to point out is we did a TOD study recently. As Jared was talking about, that circle in the middle is actually one of our linked transit station stops. So once again, we're serviced by rapid transit in the future. But the circle highlighted area shows where the DMC has identified opportunity sites. The DMC didn't identify them, our consultant did, identified areas of opportunity. So this space, it has significantly underutilized parking lots. How do we better utilize them? How do we create more uses in a variety of uses, not only housing? I think in the past, you'd look at this and you'd say it's downtown, let's put office there, maybe a little bit of street floor retail. What we've learned is we need a variety. We need a potpourri of uses. It could be senior living, it could be affordable housing, it could be office space, it could be life science space. But what we want to have is adaptable design. We want to have a mixture of that, so that once again, it provides more resiliency when the market changes or when demand changes. This slide here just gives you sort of a better image of what the current existing condition is. As you can see, with the exception of one discovery, two discovery, and potentially a third discovery square, there's just a lot of opportunity for growth. Just trying to think if I've covered all my notes. But yeah, I think that's actually the bulk of my topics. So I'll hand it off to Scott.
Good morning. My name is Scott Ramsey. I'm the managers and facilities and property here in Rochester. And I'm here to talk to you about District Energy System, Rochester. We have started to refer to this as our geothermal district energy system, Rochester, because that is how it's being put together. It's a very exciting project. A little bit on the background. We currently have steam serving our buildings downtown, 5 of our buildings, the City Hall, the library, this building, the art, and the theater. They're served by a steam line, and that steam line is at the end of its useful life. They did do some studies to see if that steam line could be repaired, and it's just not feasible. And so our steam service will be turned off in October of next year. So we have to put together some new heating and cooling for these buildings. We did some visioning sessions with the leadership council. And the direction was to be forward-looking in our solution on how we supply our heating and cooling, meet our sustainability goals. We want to look at equity, and some of that is in housing development, if a district energy could help support housing developments, and then also to be friendly and financially attractive to developers. So that was our goal. So this slide shows some district energy systems, and a district energy system is a series of pipes that serve multiple buildings. And in our case, we'll have chilled water pipes and hot water pipes. As you can see to the left, the red line shows steam that's less than 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And as the temperature of the water goes down, the efficiency goes up. So this shows 4 generations of district energy. Steam was 140 years ago. The 180 water is for the second and third generation. And now the newer generations are the 130 degree water for the buildings. So what we did was we looked at the cost to convert all of our buildings, including this one, to 130 degree water. We had some good learnings from this. If you talk to an engineer, they'll say, well, this building was designed for 180 degrees. And if you derate all the systems, it's going to cost you multiple millions. Well, what we did was we actually took these buildings and converted them to 130 degree water when it was 0 outside. And these buildings did exceptionally well. So there's generally more capacity than people think. So we were able to figure out ways to convert our buildings a lot less expensively than we originally thought. So our plan is to convert our buildings to 130 degree water. And off to the right there, you see all the different sources of energy. And geothermal is an excellent product. It's electrical. It can produce heating and cooling, and it can produce water at 130 degrees. So that's the direction we're going. And there's also a 5th generation district energy that I think is exciting. We're just learning about that, but I think that'll have application in residential housing. So this is a map of the city buildings in the salmon colored. You can see City Hall, the library, the Civic Center, where we're currently located. We would build an energy station on the north side of the Civic Center, and we would have geothermal wells. We're planning on 7 geothermal wells to serve 70% of the demand throughout the year of these 5 buildings. So the geothermal technology has really advanced. We're fortunate in this area to have really good aquifers, and the geothermal technology is down in the aquifer. We also have properties that are adjacent. You can see 4 in purple, and the salmon buildings are about 700,000 square feet, and then there could be 1.5 million square feet built on those properties. The city owns 3 of those properties. The old post bulletin site is not owned by the city. We've designed this system with taps to connect to these properties when they're when they're available. And we've been encouraged developers to talk to us about connecting. We are putting together a model to be able to sit down and show if you did the normal system, what your cost would be over time, whatever period, and then if you connected to this system, what your cost would be. So in 2030, when our PU is 100% renewable, this system will be 100% renewable because it's all electrified. We'll have geothermal for 70%, and then we'll have electric boilers for that little bit of couple months when we have to run supplemental heat. There was an RFP put out for the north lot. So there is some work being done on that with the developer for multi-family housing, and we would encourage the connection. If there's existing buildings along this route, we would certainly look to connect that as well. So just to recap, the urgency is we're going to lose the steam next year. So we do have a bonding request in for this project. It's 31.6 million. If successful, we're already in design. We have the design ready, and we'd be able to get this built by that deadline. It's an opportunity to be a foundational transformational project. We want to be a demonstration project to share the results of our geothermal well, any of our building conversions, anything we can do to help other people think about this. And I would really encourage developers doing residential to really start looking at some of this geothermal technology. A year ago, we didn't even have it on our radar. And now there's a couple of different firms we're doing studies with, and we want it to be scalable and adaptable to just take advantage. We don't know what technology might be down the road. So we really want to be able to take advantage of everything that's in the future. And we will be a pathway to net zero buildings. And then the equity portion is if we could build housing that's less cost, less operating costs, well, then that would help, with the equity portion. Resiliency, it's instead of having multiple boilers and chillers in each building, it's all spread out to a system. And as more people connect to the system, the cheaper it gets for everybody, the more efficient it gets. And we want to be a demonstration project. We will share whatever information, whatever our learnings are, because we really want other people to think about this as an option. So the key things to our plan is to convert the buildings to 132 water or less. That is key because then a geothermal well or heat pump can produce that water. Having piping that goes to various buildings, there's some really good efficiencies out there if you get simultaneous heating, cooling. A civic center like this is needing cooling during the winter. That heat can be transferred and used by another building needing heating. And that is the end of my presentation.
All right, we have about 10 minutes for questions for the infrastructure projects. So any questions from the audience are more than welcome. Yep, can we just wait for the microphone? It's right behind you. Thank you.
Silver Lake, geothermal. They're talking about dredging, or they're talking about filling it in or doing whatever. 15 years ago at Shattuck St. Mary's, we built an ice arena, which is a huge generator for geothermal. And we lined the soccer fields and everything beneath it with the piping that you're doing. Stormwater management ponds, Hartman Farms, where the theater is on County 22. That stormwater management pond, Dave Hartman and Clay Hartman used geothermal beneath it for the theater building. I guess my question is, we've been doing this for decades. My question is, who coordinates with the park department with regard to like Silver Lake and implementing a geothermal system by dredging it and the pond that's there? And every stormwater management pond with a Troy Erickson, for example, at the city, to use more geothermal and bring it into apartments surrounding the lake and that area coming back downtown. I've heard that you were going to do this here. But there's so many other opportunities that we aren't taking advantage of for affordable housing. Talk about other expansions in the city or how we go about doing that.
Yes, I guess that's a great discussion. I don't really know how we would go about. We'd have to talk to our colleagues. I was specifically looking at trying to get geothermal downtown. So I can put geothermal next to City Hall and I would have 7 wells to serve 70% of the load for this capacity throughout the year. So a couple wells maybe at City Hall or maybe they're all at Civic Center. We have to determine exactly where they would go. But I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's some really interesting technology with geothermal, different from what you're describing. A lot of these current technologies that are getting a lot of interest, and we're supporting a study to look at, go down into the aquifer and use that, have a heat exchanger.
What I was trying to say to you is like at Shattuck, for example, we took the new ice arena that we built and we cooled the entire campus, every building in the campus.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can go to Graham Arena out there at the Olmsted County Fairgrounds. You can take what we call them generators, and that's what they are. So you could heat the pools at the rec center. You know, you can go to Graham Arenas and pick up all the geothermal there and use a whole series of buildings surrounding that area as well. And that's all I was trying to point out, that we're wasting a great opportunity.
I agree.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the audience?
So this is around Discovery Walk. It looks like a great amenity. I'm wondering if how that has influenced other design guidelines outside of Discovery Walk. Is there a complete streets policy? Is there other things that are actually encouraging, better pedestrian traffic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Glad you asked it. I would say each project that we do, at least the ones that I've recently been involved with, has influenced the subsequent projects. So Heart of the City is a great example where we have some prototyping. We had a community advisory committee. We did some of those things, and then we took a lot of the lessons learned from that and then implemented them into Discovery Walk design. We're also going to be doing a post-occupancy analysis of Heart of the City to learn, now that we've designed it, we've built it, people are utilizing it, are they utilizing it in the way that we thought or hoped, or maybe different, but also good different, right? So, it's important to analyze going into a project, during it, and then afterwards. So I'd say, like, especially with Discovery Walk, the co-design process that I mentioned, Kevin led, and I got to be a part of it, has also been implemented now on the Rapid Transit project with Jarrett's Link project. It was implemented on the downtown waterfront small area plan, which is the Ampey site. That's 65 acres, so we utilized it for that. Things like the 6th Street Bridge, the River Fermi Imagine spot that is next to the government center there. So we've been using it, and now we actually have a full set of guidelines on how to effectively utilize or use the co-design process. Kevin, do you remember what's that officially called? Do we have a name for it?
Community co-design. I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Clever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, I don't know if that answered your question, but a lot of the elements that we've learned, especially these large public improvement projects downtown, we're taking those and implementing them elsewhere in the city.
We got a virtual question. Nice.
Can you hear me? Okay. So this question is regarding Discovery Walk. Has there been any discussion around creating benches and seating areas that are open and welcoming, as opposed to benches with armrests or separators? And can the seating areas be designed to be equitable and truly welcoming to all residents?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I see where they're going with that, but it's a good, valid question. And so I think the conversation is probably referring to the benches that we have at Heart of the City, which were designed and tested for a variety of accessibility. You can stand on one end if you are in if mom had a stroller, a parent, I should say, had a stroller, or maybe in a wheelchair, they could roll up and have their back up against the bench. We actually tested the different heights of the benches, the different angles of the benches, and they all have a variety of different designs for those reasons. There are armrests on them. And what the question's referring to is, does that prevent maybe people that are unsheltered from sleeping on the benches at night? And that is something that we also look at. I wouldn't say that was a conscious design effort for the armrests within the benches heart of the city. Benches on Discovery Walk are going to be longer. I don't know at what interval off the top of my head the armrests are going to be, but they're going to be longer. We always do try to design our benches to be maximally accessible. But I do acknowledge that there is some intentional design that has to be put in to making sure that they are accessible to everybody.
Great, thank you. Probably have time for one more question. All right, with that, I think we're probably good. We got about a 10-minute break and we'll get going for our next schedule. So round of applause, thank you.
Okay, we're gonna get started again.
Just the two of you.
Okay, all right. We can welcome you back to the front of the room. So my name's Eric Muschler. I am the Director of Housing and Health Equity at the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, and I'm just going to be facilitating this panel. It is a large and wily panel. There's even more coming up, I believe. So there's really, well, this is also right before lunch. So I know that you will have the focus and energy to the front of the room because you know you're rewarded with lunch right after it. So let's keep
Or
that
this
in
will be
mind.
the shortest panel discussion of the day.
Yes, that's usually what happens, but you got to say something. We have the part, there's two parts to this conversation. The first is really around resources and tools and the interaction of those tools around housing, right? And so we have the key resources up here. So you're going to want to study their faces, get their numbers, get their email addresses, because these are the folks that have some financial tools that you may find very helpful. So that's the first part. The second part is we're going to dig into some really more specific opportunities, sites, parcels that are current or on the horizon from the city and the county's perspective. So that'll be another piece of this conversation. So we're going to start. The organizations that are here represent Destination Medical Center, Olmsted County, City of Rochester, the coalition, the Rochester Housing Coalition that we've made reference to, and then the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, which also has financing tools for affordable housing. So to get started, we're going to allow each of the entities here to do, 5-6 minutes on well, first they're going to introduce themselves and then talk about their agency's financial tools and how they can be accessed and tie in some examples of how they're used. So we're going to go in this order: DMC first, the county, the city, the coalition, and then the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. Okay, so we're starting, and Catherine will kick us off.
Great, thanks so much. And should I grab that
Oh, yeah.
slide controller maybe? Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'll move quickly through a little bit about DMC and then show you an example project. So this is the DMC district, so you can see the boundaries there. And so that is where we are eligible to utilize our funds, right? So that's a kind of critical map to understand, and you can see it on our website and interact with it and be able to look parcel by parcel to see whether you're inside or outside the district. The orange boundaries represent the extension from the original boundaries of the DMC district. You can see that tail that kind of goes out to the west. There is the bus rapid transit corridor out to the West Transit Village. And we really operate at the behest of our board, and our board sets the priorities, and the DMC EDA staff works to meet the board's priorities. And those priorities can evolve and change over time as the DMC is set up to be a nimble organization that is expected to respond to the market over the 20-year period that we are in effect. And so you can see right now, we have geographical, product type priorities. Our three big goals for the DMC 20-year plan has to do with our private investment figures, the numbers of jobs that we create, and the growth in the tax base that we're expected to achieve. So every project we evaluate along those three metrics. We're really interested in market opportunities that are validated by the market, right? It can't be something that a market's not supporting at all, but we're there to sort of get over the hump to catalyze first in market opportunities. So we're really focused on innovation and bringing us ideas that we could perhaps help you test if there's not a precedent in the Rochester market. We have ambitious sustainability goals that are very clearly outlined in our on our website as well. And then this last one is the one I'm personally most passionate about, is how does a project contribute to our City of Health experience goals that we have for the DMC? In 2020, we had our first 5-year update, and these are the priorities that the board kind of layered on top for the next couple of years here while we're in the phase 2 period of the DMC. So you can see those there. Housing affordability is one of them. And here's an example of a recent project that is a mixed income workforce housing project. It has 50%, 60%, and 80% AMI units. And critically, every project we look at what components of that project have public infrastructure elements that we are able to support. And again, that's via the DMC's enabling legislation. And on this particular project, you can see that they had about $11 million of eligible infrastructure, and we were able to fund a portion of that. And really, we looked at this project as hitting an affordable living target, right? So that's not just rents, that's also what's your transportation costs, what are your utility costs, and the location of this project on, the Broadway corridor that's seen a lot of transit improvements happening, and the sustainability targets they're meeting will lower both transportation and utility costs, in addition to the 50, 60, and 80% AMI rents. So you can see here a couple of the community benefits that this project is hitting. So I know sometimes it can seem challenging to understand exactly where DMC fits in. And something I would say is, you'll hear about a lot of great programs and opportunities, and we try and collaborate closely with all the other partners and really make sure that we're using the right tools for the right projects. Broadly speaking, in phase 2 of the DMC plan, which is 2020 to 2025, we anticipate about $200 million of public infrastructure support in total. And what portion of that is going to go to private development projects? We're anticipating between 25 and 45 million of that could support innovative private development projects that come forth seeking support from the DMC. And our board approves on an annual basis a capital plan. And so you can see there in 2021, they authorized 7 million to be spent on strategic private development. 2022, 3 million. And then quarterly, we can review specific project applications. And those have to be approved both by our board and the city council. It's a yes and yes model. Make sure we're all aligned and we collaborate really closely. And so, but before you even get to that point where you're considering application, we want to talk to you. We want to understand, we want to work with you very early on. The earlier on, the better. So please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll put you in touch with the right people so we can talk about your projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. David, you want to go next?
Don't worry, I don't have any slides, so I'm the one who doesn't have slides. See,
He's
I
got a
told
whole
you I
lot of
was-
numbers to show you again.
No, and a lot of so I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Dave Dunn. I'm the Olmsted County Housing Director. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about as far as county investment really does fall within the purview of the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing and kind of our partnership there. But what I do want to just kind of highlight on the front end is just a couple of the things that we do and kind of how we operate. So we are very unique in Olmsted County for a lot of ways, but maybe one of the ways that we're unique is that we have a housing and redevelopment authority that's embedded within the county's health, housing, and human services division. And so with that, I think the housing department was created, and we're really trying to do, we have two kind of major objectives. And so The first one is those HRA objectives. So there's some federal programs. So one of the tools that, I know we get asked about are project-based vouchers. And so I'm looking at Michelle Merksbauer, who's our deputy director and who always tells me do not promise project-based vouchers to developers. But that is an option and an opportunity as we look at, specific options and housing affordability tools that we have in our tool belt. So we have about 650 vouchers in Olmsted County right now, and we have project-based right about, I think we've committed 80 of those. Well, 50, but then 30 more. So almost 90 that we've committed. So it's always good to have people who really know all the information sitting in the crowd to help you, by the way. So no, but we're doing that. We're working on that information. So as far as kind of our public programs go, we have that. And we also then with our HRA levy that the Olmsted County Board has been approving now since 2015. The 2022 levy is about $3.9 million. Of that, a little over $1 million is really set aside for development and development opportunities. So as we kind of look at what are those tools and how do we move forward and what does that look like? It's really about working with our partners here and kind of prioritizing those funds. So kind of looking at our partnership in that role and how do we move forward? So we have a lot of tools. The other thing I would mention is the county board has made a significant investment of their ARPA funds into housing. So in between housing and different programs and opportunities, the county board has invested over $16 million of their ARPA funds into housing related strategies. So that's over half of all of the funding that has been received. And really that went into two major pots. So one is to the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing, and we'll talk about that blueprint here in a minute. And then the second one is with our growing affordable inclusive neighborhoods program, or GAIN. And that's really a program that we've created to promote the development of single family homes, knowing that home ownership is becoming harder and harder and more out of reach for people. It's a $10,000 down payment for people who purchase newly constructed homes that are in that $300,000 price range. So that's a tool in our tool belt. We've got several, but I'll hand it on now to whoever is next to kind of continue going down the road.
And Terrence's next.
Hi, my name is Brent Stundy, Senior Administrative Analyst with the City of Rochester, and I'm actually going to take in this presentation with Taryn Edens. So we are going to talk about some city financial tools that the city has that may be available for developers out there looking to develop. This slide just kind of shows some of the programs and resources that we have available for the development community. Today, Tara and I are going to talk about tax increment financing, also known as TIF, and also the fee and reimbursement pilot program that the city has initiated for this year. So just jumping into TIF, as most developers know, TIF is regulated by Minnesota state statutes. So there are a lot of regulations tied to TIF. In addition to that, the city does have policies that they have established and adopted as far as the use of TIF within the city limits of Rochester. Just to point out the three main TIF categories that the city has used in the past would be the redevelopment TIF districts, housing TIF districts, and economic development TIF districts. And over the past 20 years, as you can see in that slide, the city has used TIF to help create nearly 3,000 affordable housing units within the city. Of that, about 640 of those being single family dwellings and townhomes, and just over 2,300 being affordable housing projects units. Typically, the housing TIF districts are projects that have received support via housing tax credits from Minnesota housing finance agencies. Typically, an affordable housing project, the developer reaches out to the city requesting some type of support letter or resolution from the city for when they submit their application to Minnesota Housing for tax credits, as that support from the city really helps them garner more points in the very competitive application process for those housing tax credits. So that's really the first step that the developer seeks when they have a affordable housing project. After, if the project is successful in getting housing tax credits, and the developer usually comes back to the city saying that they received their tax credits, but a lot of times they still have that financial gap in their project. So they're coming back to the city asking for tax increment financing to help fill that gap in their project. Some recent projects where the city has done that would be the Century Heights project, which I think is going to be talked about a little bit later from Wes. And recently, or earlier this year, the city did approve TIF financing for Manor Hills project, which is a affordable housing project, consisted of 72 units. All the units restricted to incomes at 60% AMI or less. In addition, the project also has 8 units in that for people who are experiencing homelessness. So that's typically how the city has used housing TIF districts in the past. Yearly, the city council does review their TIF policies, and they may make amendments to their policies. So we do plan on bringing to the council for their review in the month of June, their policies, to see if they would like to make any revisions to their TIF policies. But again, a lot of it, as far as how we can use it, is really dictated by what Minnesota state statute tells us as far as what TIF can be used for. So with that, I'll pass over to Karen, and she can talk about the fee reimbursement program.
We'll take the whole thing. Thanks, Fred. I just wanted to speak briefly about our fee reimbursement pilot program. We got approval for this from the city council just this year, and it's essentially available for all of 2022 and into 2023. It is indeed a pilot program. We hope to learn a lot from this program, and we have hopes of adopting something more permanent. So what is it? Essentially, the city council awarded us to use $500,000 of funding to reimburse the creation of owner-occupied housing. Essentially, we would reimburse up to $20,000 of city fees per unit. It is directed towards owner-occupied units specifically. And we have a maximum sale price of $350,000 for eligibility. So the intentions were indeed to pair well with the GAIN program that the county is doing. They provide down payment assistance. Our intention is to remove some fees to lower the price as well. Eligible projects include anything that's owner occupied. So single family dwellings, of course, but we would also consider the reuse of non-residential to an owner occupied housing situation. So offices to condos, for example, would be eligible. It's intended to reimburse anyone that's paying fees. So right now we've approved our first application for a builder. Essentially, they're in the process of building a unit and they've already previously got it platted, but folks that are looking to create a subdivision would also be eligible. A family that wants to build their own home, if it's in that price range, would be eligible as well. So anyone paying the fees would be eligible. I mentioned the pilot program part. You would seek approval this year. And if the project takes 1 or 2 years, depending on where you are, if you got that approval, it would be good for a year and we have an opportunity to renew it. So we're really trying to be fluid in this first year to understand how it can be used best. But going back to the point of what can we do to address all the different priorities, this is one very specifically aimed at increasing supply and supporting home ownership. Thanks.
Joe Marie with the coalition is next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jo Marie Morris for the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing, and I was recently passed the baton from Dave Dunn and Jen Woodford from the Rochester Area Foundation, who had been serving as co-directors and done an incredible job in building a foundation for this this organization. I want to talk to you a little bit today about what the coalition has done thus far in response to some of the things you heard about earlier today with the Maxfield study. The Maxfield study did a good job of really identifying some of those barriers. And so the coalition took that information and then worked through these priorities that Dave Dunn had explained to you earlier, and looked to solutions to help move this forward with the housing blueprint. The housing blueprint was really just adopted recently. It's really intended to be a guide for the next 5 years. That said, it's not meant to be static. We do anticipate that we're going to be having more barriers identified and more opportunities identified, and hoping to make changes as we need to and pivot as we need to in order to make the most impact for the community. The members of the coalition include the City of Rochester, Mayo Clinic, Olmsted County, Destination Medical Center, and the Rochester Area Foundation. The Rochester Area Foundation really serves as kind of the administrative arm to the coalition, and also does a lot of work with holding the funds for us, making sure the funds are invested correctly, all the things that need to happen with that as really the financial backbone and administrative backbone for the work. So what is the current status of the funding commitments from the different partners? As Dave Dunn recently indicated, the county has given $10 million of ARPA funds commitment towards affordable housing. There's been a $5 million investment from the Mayo Clinic, $1 million investment from the City of Rochester, which includes $500,000 in cash and another $500,000 in this fee waiver program that Taryn just described to you earlier, which we had also learned has been a barrier for some affordable housing in the past. So how can we get through that? And then $1 million of cash reserves. And so the idea is to use the $17 million to meet our community housing priorities that have been established, those 5 priorities, and then maximize at the same time our community impact. So the funding categories as they have been allocated by the coalition include $5 million each for single family housing, $5 million for multifamily housing, as well as affordable housing preservation or NOAA projects, $2 million for the community land trust, for a total of $17 million. The allocation for starting this work is $1 million for each of the single family, multifamily, and affordable housing preservation, with an initial commitment for $500,000 to the community land trust and First Homes for some of their great work. The total investment hoping to be made to the community land trust is $2 million, and to be adding an additional 30 homes to the community land trust. So what type of assistance are we providing? So we're really targeting home construction with values less than $300,000, and that does not include the cost of land. We're looking at senior housing, accessible housing, also really interested in some of these innovative development types and ideas like the ADUs. How can we use those to improve density, get more people housed, but preserve the neighborhoods as they are existing. And then also for property acquisition as well. Single family home assistance types include low interest construction loans, loan guarantees, grants, fee write-downs. The suggested grant right now for caps is $25,000 per single family home and up to $500,000 per project. And we're still working through some of those guidelines. Then finally, kind of under construction is really what we're our strategy on multifamily housing and the NOAA fund. And we're working with some consultants right now that will be bringing back some ideas for strategy, specifically around how we're going to preserve some of the affordable housing we already have in the community. We're really interested in looking at things like, okay, are there LIHTC projects out there where you know, the 15 or 20 years is up, they're going to be available for market rate. How can we preserve those in affordable housing? Can we acquire them? Can we do some rehab to make them and sustain that affordability here in the community? I want to also just give you a couple really quick examples of what the coalition has done. And I'm kind of on the front end and the back end with the coalition because I had led the effort to bring Jeremiah program here to Rochester. And the Jeremiah Program Campus was the very first allocation or award by the coalition in 2018. That project was a $15 million project, 65,000 square feet, 2 levels of 40 apartments, including 4 high priority homeless units. The main floor, a child development center, community center, classrooms, administrative center, commercial kitchen, playground. So a very large project. And it's a project that absolutely would not have happened with, well, some of these amazing people already in the room, like Jose Ribas, who was the architect on the project, Weiss Builders, Susan Strandberg, who was a key partner for Three Rivers to make it happen. But really what made that project go was this incredible cross-sector effort, right? So we were really fortunate in that we had someone who donated the land for the project. And then we had another local philanthropist donate up to $500,000 to get us started. So we went with that and we're able to have Jose do some great design work. Then we came to the coalition and said, hey, you know, we're going to apply for low-income housing tax credits. And we've already got this local support. What can you do to help? And that was just an incredible experience for us. So we had the City of Rochester came in and provided TIF. The HRA or Olmsted County provided support for 9 units for a period of 10 years. There were some kind of complications around that we walked through later, but that really helped with our scoring for low-income housing tax credits. And Mayo Clinic gave a $320,000 deferred loan. So we were able to use that commitment and leverage all this local community support and successfully get low-income housing tax credits allocated to us in that very first year of application. So that's an example of a big project. And the first project, the coalition was really had multiple players and the partners really sitting together and rolling up their sleeve to figure out how they could make that happen. One of the most recent ones is much different. Recently, a couple weeks ago, Jeff Urban and his team at Bear Creek Development broke ground on housing, supportive housing for 6 units for homeless and near homeless veterans, something that's been needed in our community in Southeast Minnesota for a really long time. That whole project was $450,000. The coalition contributed $60,000 for a grant, so $10,000 per unit, tied to the units being less than 50% AMI and for a period of 10 years, and also gave a low interest loan for a period of 5 years to make that project happen. So what I would say to you is that the coalition is really interested into learning more about and helping move the needle on affordable housing in that whole continuum of both supportive housing, single family housing, and multifamily housing. And I'm really looking to hear from you as developers, as financial brokers, as lenders about what barriers you've been facing, about what we can do as a coalition to remove those barriers and really take advantage and make the most impact with our opportunities that we have here in the community to meet those needs.
Thank you. Wes, you want to round us out? Greater Minnesota Housing Fund.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I guess I don't have my slides, but that's okay. So I'm Wes Johnson with the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. I'm the senior underwriter and loan officer. You're missing my slides on the presentation deck. This is just a summary of our product term sheets, but I've got my slides in front of me and I'll try to do a good job of explaining what we do and provide a few examples of the types of projects that we get involved in. So we are a statewide nonprofit providing financing for the production and preservation of affordable housing across the state, including in the Twin Cities and across Greater Minnesota. Since 1996, we've invested $661 million into 195 different communities across the state and leveraged over $2 billion of financing for affordable housing. This has created or preserved over 18,000 affordable homes. We provide about $100 million annually currently and have a few different entities that we provide those funds through. So the Minnesota Equity Fund provides tax credit equity for tax credit projects of about $30 to $40 million per year. We also have a NOAA Impact Fund, which provides equity investments to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the Twin Cities metro area. I'm on our lending team, and we do about $50 million of development loans annually, including pre-development, acquisition, construction, and permanent financing for affordable housing projects. We do a small amount of grant making to support strategic efforts across the state. And then one thing I also wanted to mention is we're working to raise a $100 million housing impact fund for the production of new workforce housing without tax credits, as well as the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing statewide. So that's something that I can answer questions about if folks have them. One of the projects that we have done recently in Rochester is we've helped preserve Center Street Village Apartments in partnership with Rochester First Homes. This was the first project, first multifamily project that Rochester First Homes acquired, and Greater Minnesota Housing Fund provided a low-cost amortizing first mortgage to help keep that project affordable for the long term, with 50% rents affordable at 50% of area median income. And this project also benefits from participating in the Olmsted County 4D Affordable Housing Incentive Program, which if you're willing to commit to providing, to restricting your units as affordable for at least 10 years, it reduces the property tax rate for affordable rental projects. And that increases the amount of funding that we can provide to a project through our loan products. This is also a good example of GMHF's ability to use our expertise to provide technical assistance in helping to create a financing plan for a project for an emerging developer that hasn't done a rental housing project before. So we're happy to do that and play that role. Another project that we financed recently is Century Heights, also in Rochester. It's a new construction project, 76 units of affordable workforce housing that was created using tax credits. It also includes a handful of permanent supportive housing units for formerly homeless households and people with disabilities. And this is a good example of GMHF often plays a role as both a construction lender and the long-term permanent lender for tax credit projects, to be a one-stop shop for the debt that those projects need to be successful. We provided a $14.5 million construction loan that was paid off. Half of it was paid off by the tax credit equity after the project was completed, and half of the financing remained in as a permanent loan and is supported by the rental housing income as well as the tax increment financing provided by the city. The project is developed by Joseph Development, and US Bank was the syndicator of the tax credit equity. So that's all that I have for my presentation. The best way to work with us is to reach out and give us a call. I can provide my business card. My email address is wjohnson@gmhf.com.
Do you know if the slides are? Oh, cool. Okay.
Oh, excellent.
So he just raised the important point of how to get in touch with folks. So I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to have the audience ask questions. But I'm going to ask one question to Joe Marie. So all of the tools along this table, there's a coalition in place that's trying to really help coordinate. So if you're a developer, where do you start? How does that work across this table?
I think you start with the coalition and you start with me. And then we maybe call up Taryn and say, hey, we need a pre-development meeting, or these are the issues that we're having. So we have early planning discussions. Take a look at what the pro forma is, any suggestions we might have, and then make those connections. I also I just have to mention, because I had forgotten, when we did the Jeremiah project too, JMHF was also an incredible partner for us as well. They did the construction loan and they also did a deferred loan for us too, and wouldn't been able to do it without them. So anyway, they're also a great organization to work with. But really, I mean, the coalition is about kind of breaking down those silos, right? We want to be the point person. The coalition wants to be the point person so that you're not having to go to 10 different entities really to figure out how to make a project work. And certainly, I wouldn't be able to answer all the questions, but again, I have access to all the people that have the answers to the questions, and we can all sit down together and really trying to find a way to make the project work best for you.
So there's, just to summarize it, there's no wrong door. You can reach out to any of these folks and they do want to talk to you early and often. But if there's a front door, probably it's the coalition and they can actually help you reach the right place. And as Joe Marie said, I mean, housing is a particularly complex space and it takes the cooperation and mix of resources across these entities that can actually make your project happen. So I think those are sort of the two big key messages here. And you saw the plethora of tools that are available, and Rochester has done an amazing job of pulling these resources together in one place. So I'm going to turn it, we've got about 10 minutes for questions, and then we're going to shift to the site opportunity, parcel opportunity conversation. Okay, so any questions from the audience? This is why it's hard to do before lunch. Everyone's like, I'm going to get to lunch earlier, but there we go.
So just to better understand, the main door is Joe Marie there for any kind of development or developer. So is it only exclusively for the housing, or it can be for like a property that has like, it can be like a mixed use, it can include senior housing, condominiums, such stuff like that?
Great question. Who wants to take that one?
I would say all of the above, all of the above. And one of the things that we've been doing to try to inform ourselves better is we just finished a co-design project around senior housing and really what the seniors and community are looking for and how we can move that strategy forward. And we're working right now on putting a work group together for BIPOC home ownership too, to really understand what are the needs of our entire community to move the needle on BIPOC housing. So that'll be, you know, reaching out with our folks at IMAA and Diversity Council, really understanding what we need to do to help with multi-generational living that some of our immigrant families are really wanting to have, looking at how can we start working with multifamily units that have more than just the 2 bedrooms when you have more than a couple of kids. So that work is ongoing as well, but all of the above, from small rehab projects, multifamily to mixed use, we want to learn, we want to hear it all and have, you know, all those ideas out on the table.
Okay, other questions?
I will just mention quickly to everyone and draw your attention to the packet that we do have a QR code. And once you scan it, you will find all the presentation material, including Wes's missing material. It will be there. So we apologize for that.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question.
I don't
Oh, there we go.
I don't really have a question. My name is Kenneth Bush. And I just want to say thank you to the people here that are presenting this. And I just want to especially say thank you to Joe Marie Morris, who actually was in my office a couple of weeks ago. I'm an African-American BIPOC developer here in southeastern Minnesota. I also want to recognize Johnny Oprah, who hopefully is going to speak. One of my mentors that I haven't met yet is the African-American developer in the Twin Cities. Glad to see you, sir. But Joanne is a woman of her word. She's been very successful with working in underrepresented communities. And Jeremiah program is an exact example of what we're trying to accomplish across the board, and bring it more or less into the private market. So I just want to say, keep up the great work, Joe and Marie, and hopefully we can get some projects off the ground, and other folks will have opportunities to grow their portfolios or opportunities in Rochester to create economic empowerment where all boats can float and we can stop having these conversations. So.
Great endorsement, thanks. Anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to shift gears and do the second part of the this group, and this is really to give you a sense of current opportunities, current and on the horizon, in the pipeline that the county or the city has. These are sites, parcels, and I'm going to bring John Wade up to the stage because he's going to talk from the perspective of the Rochester Area Economic Development, Inc., which is doing, I believe, the letter of interest or what is it called? Statement of interest for a particular site. So the two speakers are going to be Brent Spenby from Rochester, but let's start with the county, or hold it. Do we have an order for the? Oh, got to start with Brent because the slide order.
Brent always goes first.
Okay, so Brent's going to give the city's parcel and information, and then we're going to have John.
Well, thanks for letting me go first. Otherwise, if John went first, I probably won't get any time to talk. So,
and I even called you out this time before. It was like Tara, and I didn't even say your name. So
I'm just here to talk about some potential future opportunities for affordable housing or other types of development in the community. So I'm going to start out with the disposition of some city real estate. Last year, the Rochester City Council looked at their existing real estate holdings that they had to see if there's any opportunity that would allow them to take that real estate and help them meet some of their strategic plan priorities that they have adopted. So what came out of that exercise was a list of properties. You can see there's 20 properties listed on that list, and they're ranked from high to low priority. And there's also a map that kind of shows where those properties are located in the community, along with the 3 strategic priorities that the City Council of Rochester has adopted. So based off of their direction last fall, the first piece of property that went out for a RFP, which is a request for proposal, was actually 8 parcels that located just north of here across the street. Currently, those parcels consist of a surface parking lot. So as I mentioned, an RFP went out in September of last year. That RFP was posted on the city's website, along with emailing that RFP out for 2 developers that have either developed in Rochester in the past or have expressed interest in the community. So I think there was over 50 names that that RFP was sent out to. Based on that, we did receive 3 proposals back, and there was a evaluation committee put together that reviewed and scored the proposals based on the review committee's reviewing of those proposals. They did come forward in March of this year with a recommendation to the City Council that they select Sherman and Associates as the developer of the site. So that's where we are at this point. So Sherman has been selected as the developer, and we're currently working with them on the development of the site. Just conceptually, the site had a mixture of affordable housing along with market rate housing on that site, along with trying to get some activation there along the river, as the evaluation committee made it quite clear to them that how important it was to activate that site, especially along the river. So again, we're in the early stages of this, working with Sherman Associates, and we'll have many engagement with the community as far as ultimately what this site should look like, but it will be a mixture of affordable and market rate housing on that site, along with associate parking for their development. So potentially, we are looking at doing some future requests for proposals. The ones slated for this year are more likely targeted towards individual single-family development. The slide shows two sites. One is on 20th Street Southeast, which is zoned R1, fairly small piece of property, 0.2 acres in size. It was a former substation of Rochester Public Utilities, along with a site off of Christopher Drive Southeast, which is about 2.29 acres, which was a former well site. Currently that property is zoned interim. So you can watch. And then I guess the third one that would probably do it together is a blank or a package RFP, which is a very small piece of property. It's 0.07 acres in size. It's currently zoned R4. I think those those three parcels would be packaged together in the RFP, soliciting for development proposals on those three parcels. And our goal is to get that out to the development community here within the next couple of months. Some other potential RFPs going out this year would be for a property that's zoned B1, which is located off of Wheelock Drive. Currently that site is zoned B1. It's about 3.5 acres in size. And then the other site would be 40th Street Southwest, which is about 2.5 acres in size, which is currently zoned M1. So our goal is, again, to get those out this year to see what interest there is for development on those parcels. And then for 2023, we are looking to get a RFP out for 5 lots located within the Olmstead development. Actually, we started out looking at these 5 lots earlier this year, thinking that we would get an RFP out for these lots this year. But with the current zoning of the property, which is a PUD, PUDs are hard to work with. So we're kind of going to wait and see what happens with the development code update. And if that gets adopted, these would not be zoned PUD anymore. So it'd be a lot easier to get something built on those lots. But our intention would be that whatever gets built on those properties would have to be consistent with the homes that are constructed in that subdivision at this point, because that neighborhood is very passionate about their neighborhood and the homes that are on there. So that are within that development. So those are some RFPs that we will be looking to do in this year and next year. So there's my contact information if anybody wants to reach out to me and get on that email list for RFPs. I can turn it over to Mr. Wade now.
And I can assure you that I will be more brief than Brent was. However, he may view that. I did want to say a special thank you. We have a number of partners at Ready. That's Rochester Area Economic Development, and including DMC. And we very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, along with the county and the city and many brilliant bankers who are in the room that also finance our work, and developers. And so we certainly appreciate that. I'd also like to, particularly as it relates to this relationship, point out that the chair of the board, Mark Tyne, is here, and Greg Wright, also 2 of the brilliant members of the county board that are going to be around for after the next election cycle. And as the others are all retiring. That said, we do appreciate their leadership in putting together this really historic partnership between Rochester Area Economic Development and Olmsted County. Not only do we have a wise thinking county board, but we have a really wonderful county administrator, and Heidi Welch and her team have been outstanding to work with. It's really a great team of people at Olmsted County that helped develop this. I'd also like to thank Jim Miner here, who is kind of that dean of data. Do take a look at his data if you're not on his list. He was also a teacher of mine at John Marshall High School. So I like to, and he's much better preserved than I am. But that said, I have the easiest map in the world to present here, because everyone knows where this thing is. Why? Because we are anchored by the project. We really refer to it as Seneca EOC. which stands for ear of corn, because it is like the easiest thing ever to find. And if you so choose to develop on this land, so this really started by formal action of the county board in January. This is my whole slide presentation, by the way, so don't wait for the next one. This started in January. There was a lot of work done before with the county to look at ways the county leadership wants to make the best use of that property that they wisely invested in. And we have joined together with them to help advance this project. That said, there are developers, even some in this room, that are looking at innovative ways to utilize that 10 acres. Those proposals are due by June 1st. It's really what you need to know. Because if you're looking at this project and that very valuable 10 acres that it sits on with that beautiful ear of corn, if you can't come up with something around this, what is that something? So it's a statement of interest period we're in, that we will review those proposals along with our partners at the county. Ultimately, those county board members get to decide what goes on to an RFP process following the deadline. So the deadline's in June. Then we're going to review all the proposals, and then we're going to advance a couple that will go on to an RFP process with the county. The other piece of great news, the only thing I'll say, I always say that ear of corn's got to stay because I don't even want to mess with that ear of corn. It's a beautiful thing, but also, and it's a very identifiable site, but there are very few restrictions on what you might propose there, whether that be affordable housing, whether that be mixed use housing, whether that be commercial use or mixed. You get to decide that as the developer in your proposal. The easiest way to do this is to go to the Olmsted County website or ready.com, and you can find additional information with all the specifics about that property, including that cool rail line that somebody could figure out what to do with that, and make this project really something and viable. You know, since I have the additional time, what do I got, about 2 more minutes to keep up with him? So there's about 2 more minutes. I will say this, that we will not, there's a lot of references to Rochester thriving. We are big promoters of that. Our interest is not only Rochester, but it's the metropolitan statistical area. That's Dodge, Olmstead, Wabasha, and Fillmore counties as well, because they are integral to our success. Those 45,000 people a day that come in here and have to live somewhere, or other places that we can develop. We will not thrive. We talk about thriving a lot. Listen, we are not thriving when you look at those disparities in housing here, or the people that can't get access to housing, or the type of housing. Look at that. You didn't get that, Brent. The type of housing we need to build and the volume we need to build. I asked a influential builder in the room, I said, okay, how do we get to 700 permits, which is even our all-time high? I mean, it's like, oh, that would be a couple of years unless we go to some large parcel where we can start to really look at some things and bring in local developers to do that, or local builders to participate. I'm interested in that model. I'd love to have a site around 500 acres where we could really start doing something innovative in that space, in addition to all the important work that's going on. And there are a lot of developers in this room, units of government, great Rochester Area Foundation, tremendous partnership. Little already raised this year, $6.7 million in a private raise to invest in businesses. It's a capital fund, private equity money, private individual capital money. We have launched something called Revest, which you can find on our website for qualified investors. We're going to raise several $1 million, of which I've assured Jen Woodford that we will commit at least 20% of that money toward affordable housing. That's a lot of money coming from private investors here. That's private investment that qualified investors. So you can look all that up and see what that's all about. Mr. Hexam's involved in, a lot of other people actually in the room are investing in this fund. It has a rate of return for you also. Nonetheless, it's another tool that we can deploy to live up to this, really creating a community where we can thrive. So whether that is commercial development or clearly what we're talking about here, residential development, we will not be able to thrive if we don't get this right. We're going to commit ourselves to that. With that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Boy, just wind him up and he goes. So I'm going to put it out again to see if there's any questions. We have up to 10 minutes, but want to see if there's any burning questions out there that you need to ask these important contexts that you will need to go to through your next project. Going once. All right, I'm going to ask the panel. We might get to lunch a little bit early. I'm going to ask the panel if there's anything any last statements, something that we may have missed or you wanted to share and forgot about. See if there's any other statements that you have.
Could I ask a question virtually?
Potential partners, potential developers.
Is there a virtual possibility?
I want to reiterate what Mary Jo said. We do really work as a team together. I mean, the city and we work with the DMC on a weekly basis. We work with the Housing Coalition. I mean, we do work as a team together, and we will get the answers if someone reaches out to any of us. We'll get you in the right direction of where you need to go. So.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome to Rochester.
My name is Wafa Al Khalifa, and I work with Destination Medical Center as the Equitable Development Coordinator. I want to start by thanking you all for joining us today in the Rochester Housing Summit. And I hope that you found the information that we presented today helpful. As I've mentioned earlier, that there is a packet at your tables, and it does have the contact information for all our speakers, as well the agenda and a QR code that you should scan and keep the packet, please. Don't leave it here. It will take you to an awesome folder that we prepared, and it has all the information relating to Rochester's housing needs. As I mentioned, that I recently joined Destination Medical Center, and it was not my first time interacting with team members from DMC or City of Rochester. I was invited in the past to participate as a community co-designer for 2 projects. You've heard about the first one, which is the Discovery Walk Linear Park that our colleague Josh Johnson talked about earlier. And the second project where I participated as a co-designer was the Mayor's Challenge, the Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge, improving the participation of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, women in the construction industry. As you know, or maybe you heard that Rochester was awarded the $1 million from Bloomberg, and we are named as one of 15 global cities winning this award, one of only 3 US cities. It became evident that community co-design is a great way to succeed in projects, focusing on uplifting underrepresented communities to participate in all stages of a project. It is also clear how Rochester's leadership is committed to building and designing with the community instead of for the community. The success of community co-design has created an unofficial expectation including co-design in any future projects, because we have seen the creative ideas and innovative solutions shared by our co-designers for issues and obstacles we have in our community. This leads me to introduce to you our final panel for the day. The experts in this panel will be talking about equitable development and innovative and creative solutions for affordable housing and housing needs. I would like to welcome our first expert, Ann Ketz. Ann is the Director of Real Estate Development and Asset Management for Urban Homeworks. Ann has experience in both affordable housing finance and development, as well as historic preservation. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
And I also would like to welcome our second expert for this panel discussion, Johnny Opara. Johnny is the owner and CEO of Joe Companies, a Black-owned real estate company that focuses on affordable multifamily housing, workforce housing, and selling residential and commercial real estate. Welcome, Johnny. And last but not least, my colleague and the Director for Housing and Sustainability with Destination Medical Center and the moderator for this discussion, Kevin Bright. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm kicking us off. As I was introduced, I'm Ann Ketz. I'm the Real Estate Director at Urban Homeworks. I didn't put up an agenda on here, but for about like the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about Urban Homeworks, what we do and why a little bit, give you a couple of project examples, and then specifically talk about some alternative ownership structures that we have both done in the past and are currently working on. So Urban Homeworks is a nonprofit community development organization. We focus on affordable housing. We've been around for 27 years, based in Minneapolis. These four sort of pillars here are what we focus our work on. So focusing on equity and housing justice first and foremost. And with that, we're trying to provide quality, healthy, as in lead-free, asbestos-free, attainable housing opportunities in historically disenfranchised BIPOC communities particularly. We are focusing on repairing and reinvigorating the existing building stock and infilling in vacant lots, new construction, and then building creative local partnerships in all of the different areas of our work. So we do small scattered site housing management, meaning most of our properties are single family duplexes, fourplexes, up to 10 to 15 unit apartment buildings. So our homeownership portfolio experience, we've got 111 units that we've completed to date in 92 buildings. So some of those have been condos. We currently have 8 in progress. Most of those have been located in North Minneapolis, which if you know anything about Minneapolis is the historically Black community in Minneapolis. And most of our homeownership sales have been restricted to 80% of the area median income or lower. Our current rental portfolio is 136 units in 48 buildings. Most of those are again in North Minneapolis, and most of those are restricted to 50% of the area median income or lower. This is a little bit of a look at our current demographics, just to say that like we not only say that we are focusing our work in BIPOC communities, but our residents and our homeowners reflect that. So of what we have data for, our homeownership sales, 74% have gone to BIPOC buyers, 58% female head of households. Our rental portfolio current makeup is 96% BIPOC residents, 63% female head of households, 28% homeless at move-in, with an average income of around $21,000 when they move in. So there's a lot of challenges that come with small scattered site housing. There's kind of a myth because they're smaller buildings, less units, that it's going to be easier. But when you're working in affordable, the funding sources are just as complex, and it takes just as long as a large multifamily building. And then you add on with the rental properties, the asset management and property management, working in buildings that are scattered around the city and don't have on-site staff, creates very high operating costs. We're already trying to do affordable rents, so our cash flow is incredibly low. And then on top of that, as I mentioned, the public funding requirements are really geared towards high capacity, high capital developers and owners. And so that just adds extra complexity and time onto our projects. So you probably ask, like, why do you do small scattered site then, right? If you can't make money at it and it's hard. So most of our building stock is small buildings, and I would say Rochester's probably the same. So we're trying to invest in our existing buildings and build to a scale that fits the neighborhoods that we're working in. And again, like I said, focusing our housing investment in majority BIPOC communities that have seen the most racist housing policies and disinvestment for generations. And one of our big priorities in that is trying to put predatory investors and landlords out of business. That's another huge problem, especially in BIPOC communities. And then finally, a big part of that is providing opportunities for BIPOC residents to purchase homes, quality affordable housing in their existing communities. So people don't have to be displaced. And of course, with that, we're trying to reduce the overall Minnesota homeownership disparity rate, which I'll talk a little bit about too. If you haven't checked out Mapping Prejudice, that's an initiative in the Twin Cities to map all the restrictive deed covenants that were placed in the early part of the century. That's a good resource to get some more information on that. So I want to talk for a minute about affordability and income limits. Sounds like I don't need to explain AMI to this group, but what I do want to put in your ear, and one of my sort of like personal advocacy efforts right now is, is who are these limits affordable for? So if you know, AMI is set by HUD at the federal level, and it is based on your pre-tax income. And it is regionally based. So for Rochester, you're going off of the Olmsted County area median incomes. For the Twin Cities, we're going off of the 13 county metro region, which is huge. And we're working in one neighborhood, one community. Again, the historically disinvested BIPOC communities are still the lowest income communities around. So when we're looking at the top right numbers there for the Twin Cities affordable income limits and home sale prices for a family of 4. Right below that is Olmsted County. So they're only about 10,000 off on the family of 4, 80% AMI income limits. But where I'm saying my big issue with how AMIs are set is it's regional and it's pre-tax. And so again, we're dealing with some of the lowest average median incomes in the communities that we're working in. So the next slides, I just try to give an example of what this looks like. So going from the Twin Cities region to Hennepin County to Minneapolis to near North community where we're working. You can see in the top graph there, these are just the average household incomes for the area. Twin Cities has a 41% that are above 100,000 and only 16% less than 35,000. And each sort of micro level that you go down, Hennepin County, the less than 35,000 raises, more than 100,000 goes down. You get to Minneapolis, less than 35,000 goes up. And now we're in near North community and we're looking at 41% is less than 30% of the area median income. And only 18% is above 100,000. So, and the difference again between that and the Twin Cities, which our AMIs are based off of, is more than 20% for those two levels. So again, who is it affordable for? And my point in this is just saying that we really need to focus our subsidies, our additional funds into these lower income communities, because that's where the real need is, and not just looking at the whole. And then of course, our ownership disparity rate, hopefully everyone is familiar with these figures. Minnesota has the 4th highest disparity rate between white and BIPOC households in home ownership in the country. And this has actually gone down. The first stat that I pulled was from 2018 report from Minnesota Housing, which we were the 5th. And now as of 2020, we're the 4th highest. So, and then the Twin Cities has the award of 1st place for metro regions in the country. So those are really disappointing figures. And clearly we have a lot more work to do to ever actually move the needle on this in our lifetimes. And then these are just some graphs to show those percentage differences. This is from the 2018 report from Minnesota Housing that I did not update these slides, but you can see as of 2016, it was 76% white home ownership, 41% communities of color home ownership. And then the next slide gives even more broken down between different racial groups, showing the vast disparity with Black home ownership rates between white households. Okay, so in that, I'm going to give some project examples. Look at just really quick these, and then I'll go into our alternative ownership structures. So as I said, we do both rental and home ownership. So I'll give an example of each and really looking at the financing that we line up and how long it takes. So our rental portfolio is what we have done because the funding mechanisms are complex and it makes more sense to package together several buildings. So in this example, we had 5 buildings with 17 units that we packaged together into one application financing stack. We acquired them around March, June of 2013, took us another 6 months to close on financing. And then they were complete within a year to 2 after that. So it took approximately 3 years for the full project. And there's just a couple of other examples of those buildings. And then here is a look at the permanent sources on this. So we actually have 100% public financing on these properties. They are all either bonds or long-term deferred loans that have 0% interest because our cash flows are so low for 40 years. So you can see we've got just over 51% from the city around 40% from the state, and another 9% from the county. And on the right, it just breaks those sources out a little bit more. We've got 3 separate sources from the city of Minneapolis to make this possible. And then I mentioned partnerships. We're partnering in every different way we possibly can. Community engagement probably being one of the biggest areas of focus on our rental properties. Home ownership example. So this is a single family home ownership development, infill construction. We purchased the lot from the city of Minneapolis. We closed on the acquisition of that in May 2017. And it took us 2 years to close on financing because there was soil issues and our costs continued to go up and we needed to go back and ask for more funds. So we went back and forth with the city for 2 years before we got more funds to do the project. We were able to get a little bit more from Minnesota Housing as well. But that's sort of how I know, I mean, the same things are obviously everybody's dealing with that right now with the way that construction costs have been going. As soon as you get funds ready, you got to go back to your funders and ask for more. It's the same way, except we're like, we need another $20,000. Just like give us $20,000. And it's still just as complex. So there's that house completed. It's 4-bed, 2-bath, 1,800 square foot house. Construction completed about a year later and sold in December of 2020. I didn't update that, but it sold to an 80% AMI buyer. So here's a breakout side by side of the development costs and the sources, just really simple for construction gaps on homeownership sales. So our total development cost on this house was $380,000 3 years ago, which would be probably like $450 now. Our sale price was $240. So North Minneapolis appraisal values are still incredibly low. This is fair market appraised value in North Minneapolis. So we needed $140,000 in grants in order to make this project possible because it's just, you're never going to make that money back. And this is where like the public funding agencies that provide the sources, it's like we could not do this work without it. Houses literally wouldn't be built in North Minneapolis without that grant funding. And this next slide breaks that out a little bit more. And I actually really love this slide because it really shows the complexity of how many different sources go into one house. And this is the permanent financing. So this does include the buyer's mortgage. So that green is the private buyer's mortgage, first mortgage. And then they've got a couple of other sources for second, third mortgage for down payment assistance. And then all of that on the right, that sort of bar graph chart is all of our grants that went into make up that 37% grant need in the project costs. Most of it came from the city of Minneapolis, the next highest amount from Minnesota Housing, and then we had some other really small energy rebates from CenterPoint. We had a partnership with the University of Minnesota. They had a Department of Energy grant, and then we ended up putting in 2.5% of our equity into the final project gap as well, just because we could not get any other sources. That's not the goal, obviously, but that was what was needed on this project. And then homeownership partnerships, that has kind of been our bread and butter for the last many years. So we really have built out a lot of different partnerships in that area. We're always looking to innovate in energy efficiency and bringing those savings to the buyers, creating safer, healthier homes, partnering with lenders in unique ways. And we've done a lot of work on land trust as well, doing long-term affordability. And then you kind of get into these unique structures, condos, cooperatives, community ownership, and what other things look like. So that's the next piece to talk about here. So some of these alternative, I call them alternative ownership development structures. We have done all of these except for cooperatives. But we are working on our first cooperative pilot project right now, and it's been very challenging, but I'll talk about that. So I put them into two kind of buckets, lease to purchase and contract for deed being very similar, and condos and cooperatives being relatively similar. Typically, you'll see more often the lease to purchase and contract for deed in single family units, condos and cooperatives and multifamily, but both could be done both ways. And any of these can be layered with affordability and land trust partnerships for long-term affordability. So they're more of an ownership mechanism to add into the development structure. So just some quick definitions. Lease to purchase is just exactly what it sounds like. It is a traditional lease structure that there is an option to purchase later. So they're not signing a purchase agreement when they move in. There's a traditional landlord-tenant relationship. The contract for deed, on the other hand, is a legal ownership structure that it is sort of the seller is the lender essentially to the buyer. So it still feels sort of like a rental. Sometimes there was a lot of confusion from our owners that we worked with, that they thought they were renting. It's very confusing. But they're not. It's a legal mechanism, and it is recorded to title, but they don't actually hold title yet. The seller contract owner still holds title, but they have all the other rights and responsibilities of ownership. They're responsible for the property taxes and insurance and maintenance and everything else. So in our experience, my experience anyway, I think this is a more harmful option for buyers because they don't actually have the full ownership rights, but they have the ability to fail in that and be foreclosed on. So that's one of the learnings that we've found. And then the other side, condominiums versus cooperatives. Condos obviously are similar to townhomes and other units where each individual unit has its own title record and title holder. And there's a common interest community or HOA that manages the shared maintenance and common areas if there are any. Cooperatives have one title and they are held by a nonprofit corporation that is the overarching owner, and then co-op members buy shares into the cooperative. And then the co-op entity then grants leases to the residents based on those shares. So that's a little bit different structure as well. Collective ownership. So this is another look. So I'm trying to give an example here of how the gaps show up differently in the lease to purchase versus contract for deed option. So this is sort of the same look at how we have these value gaps, the amount that we'll never make back from our projects, and then what the different debt sources look like. The interim bridge financing is the piece that would be needed for a lease to purchase or contract for deed that would be different from a traditional development and sale, because you're going to have a longer period where either you're leasing it out or you're waiting for the buyer to refinance into their own mortgage. And depending on what lender you're working with, they might want more of their money back. You've got to float more of that interim. So there's sort of there's a longer risk period for the developer in there. And there's a lot of need and flexibility from the lenders. And the other part just to note in this is the way that our value gaps and affordability gaps work in home ownership is that scale is sliding based on where that fair market value lands at. So in this example, it's 275. Our rates are going up. So that's current market value in North Minneapolis for where we're working versus 242 years ago. So that keeps going up, but at a certain point, the buyer is not gonna be able to afford that, our target AMI buyer. So then we need more affordability gap to fill in the other side. And if we're trying to reach, an even lower income buyer, like is shown in this example with a 60% AMI, that's probably gonna be a land trust deal. And that affordability gap is gonna go towards the land trust lease value. This is a little quick look at how cooperative gaps work and how the different financing structures work depending on what type of a cooperative it is. So I've got 3 examples: market rate, limited equity, moderate income, and then limited equity, low income. And the primary differences in here being is who's holding the debt. So in the limited equity structures, there is the co-op debt that is held. And then in the low income, we really need to bring in that extra subsidy again, similar to traditional home ownership, affordable home ownership. But you can see the difference also being that they're buying share loans and not taking out their own mortgage. So then next, I just want to talk about, as we're looking towards increasing ownership access, and specifically in BIPOC communities, low-income immigrant communities, what have we found the community needs are? And this is a big part in these alternative structures as well. So community engagement being first and foremost important, and talking to your community members and who you're working with so that they can tell you what their homeownership access needs are. They can tell you what type of property is, best for their communities. And then sort of basing, working with that to then base your next structures and projects. And then the most important piece that we found is the culture-specific financial and homeownership education. The financial and homeownership education has to happen regardless, especially with communities that have been literally left out of the system for years. But how that is happening is really important and can have a really big impact on the success. So making sure that there's community-based trainers and educators doing both the homeownership counseling and the one-on-one financial counseling, because there's going to be credit repair and building that has to be done, goal and budget setting, and the savings and reserves planning, which when you're working with extremely low incomes is hard to do, and that takes a lot of time. And then the other big piece is financing needs, and lender flexibility is probably number one. And it's probably one of our number one barriers in actually performing on these structures. So developers in particular need flexibility from lenders in lower interest rates, the bridge loans that I mentioned to span the gap for lease to purchase and contract for deed periods. And then permanent financing for cooperatives. That is our problem right now, is there are not lenders that want to finance cooperatives. There's like one in the country that will do it. So we want lenders that are willing to be creative and flexible and kind of work outside the box to come up with solutions to these affordable housing problems that we have. Next is flexibility and creativity for buyers. And then long-term deferred financing and grant contracts goes along with that. Forgivable or granted down payment assistance for buyers, and we're really advocating for granted down payment assistance for BIPOC buyers. And then just overall seeking equitable solutions to the cost income imbalance. And then I say this need for patient capital, and that's again related to the lease to purchase contract for deed situation. When we were doing contract for deeds and we're the lender for the buyer, we also have our own mortgage, and we're fighting with the lender to keep extending because this buyer needs a little bit more time or something. What we often found happen was like folks are living so close to the edge of their incomes, one thing happens and their whole process of getting into a mortgage is derailed for another year or two, and we don't have another year or two. So we know that more time is needed, and those things aren't just going to happen overnight. And then last thing is just pros and cons of these alternative structures, and I kind of lump them all together. So this isn't specific to anyone, but we do know what we've experienced in the projects that we've done. We are able to target and serve deeper affordability for low-income households in these structures. We're able to provide a pathway for households that have barriers to traditional mortgages to get into housing and work towards that. We're fostering the community ownership and long-term affordability. And then these financial literacy cohorts and peer-to-peer networks have been huge. The cons, which probably won't be surprising to many, are the variable long-term management success of common interest communities and HOAs. That sometimes, you have one person that's running everything and they leave and it just falls apart. And with that, in relation to that, there's not enough safety net or support services for those for the buyers. Like I mentioned, that one thing goes wrong and everything falls apart, or the boards where one person leaves and everything falls apart. There's not enough support for that. And then I mentioned this previously too, but the longer risk period for developers and lenders, and not enough patience in the current marketplace. So now I'm saying you can refer back to those needs slides for how we can eliminate these cons, and that's our goal, is really working to eliminate these in our next projects. And that's all I've got.
Thanks, Ann. I think Johnny has a few slides too, if you want to pass them.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. She has a much better presentation than mine. So, my name is Johnny Opara, and I wanted to kind of just share my story and how I got into development. I'll talk about the Hollows. It's a project I'm working on in St. Paul, but I started my company back in 2009, at the heart of the recession after being laid off. And I fell into development by accident. My father was in affordable housing for a long time after having a major stroke in 1993. So it led me on this path of, one, getting my license in real estate, but two, trying to figure out how I can create more accessibility for him and folks just like him, so he can have a high quality place to live, but most importantly, be able to feel the dignity that he lost as a human being due to the dilapidated conditions that he was living in. So for me, development really helped me align with my purpose in terms of helping people, first and foremost, but most importantly, trying to figure out how I could, as a son, make him proud. The Hollows, we closed on an $18.4 million project in St. Paul just last year, December 23rd, and we're 5 months in. It's a 62-unit apartment building that we've been working on since 2018, and it comprised of 62 apartments, studios, alcoves, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms, and we have it's 60% AMI, fair market value rents, as well as 30% AMI for 5 of the units. But the Hollows was a culmination of conversations I had with the community over the last 4 years. The parking lot that the Hollows is sitting on was vacant for actually 30 years. Minnesota Cafe, which is across the street, if they would have an event, all the overflow parking would be on this parking lot. So throughout my transition from the corporate world to real estate and then real estate development, I had a conversation with Councilmember Jane Prince, who oversees Ward 7 in St. Paul. And she's known about this site after so many years, and saw that this site had a lot of potential. I went to the site and I literally saw the Hollows right then and there. And when I went to the site, I saw the potential also in terms of what that site could actually do for the community. Adjacent to that site was a business called State Supply. And this business has been in place since the 1940s. It's a family-owned business. They've now relocated to another city, but most importantly, the views that I had on this site, but most importantly, what could be built on this site was in alignment with the community. And that was bringing transformative housing, a transformative development to that community that can speak to, one, the growing population that needs access to housing that's affordable. Most importantly, you have, folks that are, one, living nearby that are paying too much for rent because they're living at market rate. Two, you have folks that are going through Metropolitan State University and they want to live closer to their school. So having access to housing that is not only close to maybe their employer, but their school, but if they're a part-time student, which is pretty much to the population for Metropolitan State University, this would be a great site for them to stay at. And then also, just in St. Paul as a whole, we are underbuilt as a population. We need access specifically on the east side when it comes to more housing that's affordable. So the Hollows, in my vision, is basically bringing market rate housing, but reflecting the economy of the community in terms of its economics. So it's a development that I've been working on for quite some time in partnership with the City of St. Paul. U.S. Bank is a tax credit investor. Redstone is handling the new construction debt and the perm. A lot of the stakeholders that took a part in getting the site to, or getting this development to the closing was Ramsey County, the Department of Deed, Met Council, LISC, which I'm one of the 12 developers in the development of cohort that was started last year. And last but not least, just the community as a whole. The Hollows, in my opinion, is a community development first and foremost. We had multiple conversations over the last 4 years with the community in terms of what they wanted. And this is what the Hollows is in essence. Really a beautiful building that is comprised of many conversations just with the community, politicians, the business community as a whole. So you can see this is really, from an architectural standpoint, really speaking to the vibrancy of the Sweetie Hollow neighborhood. We named it the Hollows because it's in the Sweetie Hollow neighborhood, so we wanted to pay homage to that community. Everything from being close to Lower Town, downtown St. Paul, minutes away from the Mall of America, the St. Paul State Stadium, and other local attractions as well. So this is the view right now as we're in construction on the third floor that overlooks the downtown skyline. So this was sent to me from my GC, which is Doran Companies, which is based in Bloomington, as they're on site right now, wrapping up L3, which is the third level of a 4-story building. This is the east view of the site right now that we're looking at. To think that this site was vacant for 30 years and no other developer decided to develop the site really says a lot. There is a lot of diamonds in the rough in terms of areas that could be developed into great opportunities for families and individuals that need it most. And I'm very proud to know that the city of St. Paul believed, one, in a first-time developer, but two, gave me an opportunity to, one, make my father proud, but more importantly, keep the promise I made to the community, which was to bring the Hollows to life. So these are just some shots of where we're at in terms of construction. Doran historically has been, well, it started by Kelly Doran, which I think everyone knows who Kelly Doran is, but the new owners, it's a women-owned business now, Ann and Ryan in Bloomington. One, their focus has always been building very high-quality, sustainable, market rate designed multifamily developments. So one of the main reasons why I wanted to go with Doran was because I wanted to make sure that we didn't build box windows. I can drive by Minneapolis and St. Paul and point out to different affordable housing developments, and I didn't want you to do that with this. I wanted to look at this, development and say, hey, you know what? This is a very nice building. This does not look like a traditional affordable housing development. So for me, it made sense to go with the right developer or the right general contractor, and they also are a developer, and also in-house they have an architectural team. So for me, having those three, to think, one, like me as a developer, but two, to build great product, if you can go to Maple Grove from the Reserve to Brooklyn Park to 610 and touring those developments, gave me a lot of confidence that they could, bring this vision to life. We just wrapped up recast, so this is our underground parking, where residents will be able to have access to 29 stalls and 15 on grade. So we have 44 parking stalls for this project. And this is my second project that hopefully we will be able to start next year, pending the construction escalation, high interest rates, and inflation that we're dealing with. This is Olmstead Commons in Brooklyn Center. This is a fabulous project that we've been working on tirelessly on with the mayor and city council and the community, working with Pope Architects on this project. We started in 2019. Again, this is another city that took a chance on a first-time developer and said, hey, we believe in you, and we need more cities, to believe in, developers that, one, may have a vision, but two, need that support, not only from a financial standpoint, but from a confidence standpoint that proves to the banks and the investors that we as well can do it too. And I think that all the developers that have a name, that have built tremendous projects, all started from somewhere. And when you start from somewhere, eventually when cities like Rochester and Brooklyn Center and St. Paul, you continue to build that relationship over time, what ends up happening is that small developer eventually becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger developer that now has been able to, one, employ individuals and create transformative projects in its communities, and be a community member as well. But this project has 54 apartments in Brooklyn Center. It's on transit. It's at 61st and Brooklyn Boulevard. We named it Olmstead Commons for the simple fact that it's adjacent to Olmstead Park. So we wanted to pay homage to, one, the community. Same thing we did with the Hollows. It's in the Sweetie Hollow community. This project, actually, the main reason why I like this project is because I grew up in Roseville and St. Paul, and I was just mentioning this earlier, but I just remember living next to a park And going to that park with my family and going to that park with, just friends that would come over, and how excited we were. This is when kids used to actually go out. And how excited we were. And to think that individuals that are living at Olmsted Commons could literally walk outside and go directly to the park and barbecue and play basketball and do all the things that kids do, was probably the most attractive feature of this site in terms of what it could be potentially. Minutes away from the highway, a commercial corridor that has your Walmart, your Cup Foods, all the different attractions you would see the family needs to continue to thrive in this market, major employers as well. This is the site plan. So we'll be providing not only grade, but underground parking as well, community garden, every amenity you would see on a market rate development as well, you would see on Olmsted Commons. This particular development actually has anywhere between 1 and 4 bedrooms. And as of right now, we have about 16 units that are geared towards supportive housing. So focusing on families and individuals that may be facing homelessness, as well as people with disabilities, very similar to my dad. And this is the exterior on the east side, which shows kind of like a visiting area, a gathering spot for the community, but most importantly for the residents there. We feel that this should be an inclusive area, an inclusive development that would allow the community as a whole to feel that this is just not only a building, but a part of the community as well. To adhere to Minnesota housing standards as far as square footages, we are looking at trying to make sure that we provide not only units that are meeting those standards, but in essence, a little larger. The housing stock for Brooklyn Center, historically since the 60s and 70s, has only focused on 1 and 2 bedrooms. We're focusing on 3s and 4s as well, because there's a lot of multi-generational families. There's immigrants like myself that came here with a 1, and some that have come in, probably the year before with their families and their parents. So not being in a position to, 1, buy their first home, but 2, being able to live somewhere that's affordable, but their mom or their dad or their grandparent can also live with them as well as they make that transition to hopefully one day home ownership. So in the QAP for Minnesota housing, ways that you can have a more competitive application is to look at adding 4-bedroom units. The only difference is that to add a 4-bedroom unit increases your cost of construction. So that's something that we have to work on as developers. The 3 and 4-bedroom units would be very similar to what you would see today in the market, even though it's affordable. But the 4-bedroom units, which is new, which we just added this year, is something that we're still trying to, figure out in terms of making sure that we can get the cost in a place that makes the project work, especially during these times. So these are the proposed 2022 units that we are presenting to Minnesota Housing, but most importantly, we just received an allocation, a recommendation for a $550,000 award through Hennepin County, which has been made public, which is great news for the project. And hopefully between today and tomorrow, we should know, in addition to funding for AHIF and ARPA funds for this project. This is a very important project for the community. We feel very confident that this project, one, could potentially, depending on, how we can get this project to pencil, could close next year, but also be a value add to the community in terms of the number of units it's going to bring to the community, but most importantly, really speaking to the conversations that we've had over the last 2.5, 3 years. And there you go.
Great presentations. Thank you both for being here today. We have a little bit of time for questions from the audience and panel questions before we wrap up. And I can kind of kick us off. Maybe I'll get us going after lunch. I feel a little bit of, we need to pick me up here, so I'll do that. So I'm intrigued by both of your presentations because they are unique approaches between home ownership and also rental opportunities with varieties of unit mixes, numbers of bedrooms, kind of an emphasis on dignity and dignified housing. In your minds, and you shared some of this already, but what are the key ingredients to create these equitable developments and these opportunities? Like, what is the secret sauce? What are some keys that I think we could share with the audience here as they kind of go on their journey to develop similar projects?
I'll let her go first.
Sure. I think for me, I mentioned community engagement and really focusing, how is the way that we put it, community focused, community culturally centered training and education, especially for the homeownership side, I think is really important. On the financing side, I mentioned public financing and grants. Like in the work that we're doing, we literally could not do this without it. And so, I also complain a fair amount about the funding sources, but because they can be very difficult and challenging, there's lots of complexities, but it's vital. Those are for me the two big things: is community focus and the public subsidy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would say that first and foremost, having a partnership with the community and speaking to the community, in my opinion, is the biggest thing. And I think the reason why we had a design charrette with the city of St. Paul, where we basically provided a multitude of different photos of different building types. We didn't go in there with a building. We actually asked them, what would you like to see built here? So having that partnership first and foremost, and giving them that the respect, I think encourages them that not only are they going to be around for the ride, throughout this process in terms of from, securing the site, going through the process with the city and the state, but most importantly that they have a stake, in this development process. And I think, they could have been the difference between the hollows closing or not. In fact, we had to sign an easement agreement at the last minute in December to get the hollows to close with the adjacent townhouse, the Sweetie Hollow brownstones, in order for them to be on board. So engaging the community, if you can do that first and foremost before anything, I think is what's going to propel these types of projects to continue to move forward, regardless if they like the project or not. But at least it gives you a diversity of thought in terms of their experiences and their views in terms of what they want to see built in their community. So if you can engage the community, be fair, listen first and foremost, I think you have a really strong chance, regardless of your performer pencils and all the good stuff that comes along with that. But just engage in the community, I think definitely would provide more opportunities for projects to move forward.
Great, thank you. Oh, we have a question from the internet, I guess is how I'll phrase it.
Two questions here. I think both are directed at Anne. So the first one, do the homeowners have to pay property tax at market value or on the reduced cost?
The reduced cost, they can get the homestead property tax rate, and that's even with a contract for deed. If it's a lease to purchase, it would be a regular rate. We'd be paying that and passing that back through with the lease charges.
Great. And then the next one is, in the owner occupied units sold to low modest income residents, do the buyers get to keep 100% of the profits above what they paid for the units when they sell?
Great questions. So, and I have to clarify the AMI percentages that we're talking about, because the way that HUD defines them, I think it's 80% is low, and then 50%, wait, am I wrong? What is it? No, 80% is moderate, 60% is low, 30% is extremely low. So most of our homeownership units have gone to 80% or lower, and those have typically been, we're selling it one time, that's not restricted. There's not a land trust involved. And so they have the ability to go on and sell that again and gain that equity back. About 50% of our work has been with the land trust, and that in that case, they do not get the full equity share. I know each land trust sometimes has their own sort of resale mechanisms. The City of Lakes Community Land Trust that we work with in Minneapolis has a 75-25 split. So 75% of the equity gain from the appraisal when you purchased it to the appraisal when you sell it, 75% of that stays with the property so that it remains affordable for the next buyer. And then 25 goes to the seller. They do, if they were to do like a major kitchen remodel or something like that, where it actually increased the value of the property, they would get to retain that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome, thanks. Any questions from the audience? Any burning questions to ask? We got Joe Marie up here.
I got the mic, so I got to go next.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Sorry.
This is for Ann. How do you comply with the Dodd-Frank bill with contract for deeds and rent-to-owns?
That's a lender question. That's a great question that I cannot answer.
Yeah, but you do it, so you have to have a lender that is involved with the contract for deeds. Is that correct?
Yeah, the way that we structured our contract for deeds is we had our own lender. We worked with Sunrise Banks out of the Twin Cities, who then gave us a mortgage for acquisition and construction and a bridge period. So it was like another 5 years that we got for that contract period. And then we, along with all of our closing documents, and it gets submitted to title as the legal contract document. So we then worked with a loan servicer. So I think maybe like the Dodd-Frank comes in these external parties, but I haven't dug into that as far as like I don't have a good answer to that, unfortunately, but I'm leaning on our lender partners and loan servicers. So we worked with Community Reinvestment Fund to collect the payments and issue statements and all of that to the buyers. Does that answer? All right.
Great. Maybe I have a question for Johnny. So Johnny, what advice do you have for folks in the audience that are maybe working or considering their first development projects? What matters and what advice?
That's a great question. Well, I would say that I'm still a student, and even though we closed on our first project last year, so I think if you want to get into development, you have to ask yourself why. And I'll be very transparent. These projects are very expensive. So when you close on an $18.4 million project, there's a lot of things that you're not told at the beginning, requirements from banks in terms of liquidity, net worth. And throughout that period, if you're looking at doing development, just know that there's a process in place, not only with the city, but also just with the community and all the different stakeholders that are at play. I get asked a lot, Johnny, I want to be a developer and, I want to get into the space. And I always ask them, do you really want to be a developer? Because right now I mentioned earlier the cost of construction. I mentioned inflation. I mentioned borrowing debt right now is very expensive. The Fed's just increased interest rates by 50 basis points. So all these things, understanding the financial acumen, understanding how to lead a team that comprises of contractors, architects, engineers, lawyers, accountants, all the different things that you don't see because you just see a building. These are all the things that you're going to have to navigate over the next 4 or 5 years. And sometimes even longer, depending if that project, can't pencil. So if someone wants to be the developer, they really need to look intrinsically and think about, why. My why was my father, period. So it wasn't about chasing money. It wasn't about a developer fee. It wasn't about fame or a news article or anything like that. It was always figuring out how can I provide access to more housing that's affordable for people like my dad that lived in a place that didn't make me happy and didn't allow him to have the experience that I would want, you know, a human being to have. And it wasn't until my dad moved to a new building and saw the lack of phone calls and his entire aura improve, because now, you know, he was living somewhere that had the amenities that he needed. He was living somewhere where he could be proud of, and just that change of environment changed his whole aura, and he started smiling more. So for me, that was the vision I was chasing. So if it's about money, then this may not be the best industry for you, because it will come, but it may not come when you want it to. But if it's about something else, if it's about helping families and individuals gain access to housing that's more affordable, specifically affordable housing, then I think you'd be on the right path. But just know that along this path, there's a process. Behind every yes, there's a no. Behind every no, there's a yes. And my favorite quote that I discovered in 2009, and that was, when your life is on course with its purpose, you're most powerful. And I say that to say that whatever business that someone wants to do and create, let it be about something that if they had a magic ball and they could wish that they could do something for the rest of their life and not get paid for it. If that is development, then that's what you're supposed to be doing.
Very powerful. That was awesome. Yeah. Seems like a pretty good note to end on, but I am curious if anyone else has any questions too. All right, we'll end on it. As a wrap up to today, I did want to thank all of our sponsors, our partners who helped put together this pretty amazing day, our panelists. Looking around the room, I think probably about 25 or 30% of the people had some sort of hand or involvement in today. So we're very appreciative, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. So a quick round of applause for those folks. Just a couple logistical items. We're going to send a survey. Johnny has something to say. 1 second, so I'll give it over to him 1 second. We're going to send a survey out. We're very interested in understanding how today went from your perspective, what worked well, what didn't, what information landed, what didn't, so that we can make improvements for next time. So if you could take the time to fill that out, it takes about 3 minutes. I practiced a couple of times, completed it myself, so I promise it's only 3 minutes. Please do so. We do have this room till 3 p.m., so you're encouraged to hang out and network and talk with others too, if you have the time and availability. But also just thanks for the gift of your time today and attention on this important topic. And Johnny, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank Kevin. I want to thank Leaf, and I also want to thank the City of Rochester again and Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. They were here earlier, and they provided redevelopment funding for the Hollows for upwards of $500,000. So it's really important that, you know, if for the emerging developers, first-time developers, that they continue to have these partnerships with cities like Rochester and St. Paul, Brooklyn Center, that can believe in them and give them the confidence that they can to bring these projects forward. So I just really want to recognize Kevin's leadership, we've leadership, and the City of Rochester as well. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks everyone for coming.